Chapter 488. Faced with Long Tianma's questions, Mu Qingwu's gaze was evasive. This soldier is very puzzled as well. The situation was urgent at the time, so I killed him on impulse. Fortunately, that junior commander had 2 or 3 captains under him to interrogate. This soldier has already ordered people to lock up all the suspects. On impulse? That didn't seem like Mu Qingwu's style at all. Long Tianma gave him a meaningful look. Let's not talk about that for now. Hurry into the palace. The sooner the better. Mu Qingwu left in a hurry. Long Tianma inspected the bag of crossbow bolts that Mu Qingwu had collected and discovered that these bolts were much shorter than ordinary ones. Moreover, the arrowheads were as sharp as blades. Even Imperial Uncle Qin's guards couldn't defeat them. As expected, they're not simple. He laughed cold. Your Highness, hurry and leave. It's not safe here. Those crossbow archers haven't been found yet. The attendant by his side urged. Long Tianma wasn't in a rush to leave. He took out half a bag of crossbow bolts and handed it to the attendant. Take this to the Xianlong Dragon Gate. Others might not have heard his words, but his personal attendant was very clear. Without a doubt, His Highness Crown Prince was going to use these crossbow bolts to kill the guards of the Xianlong Dragon Gate. The Emperor wasn't stupid. He wouldn't be nervous if the young general mobilized troops to protect the palace. But if he discovered that the guards of the Xianlong Dragon Gate had been killed by the crossbow bolts as well, then the Emperor would get out of bed immediately even if he was ill. This subordinate understands. I'll do it immediately. The attendant obeyed and left. Long Tianma's lips curved into a sinister smile. Of course he was going to make a big deal out of this. The bigger the better. It'd be best if he could connect it to the gunpowder case at the black market. That way, Chu Qingge wouldn't even be able to keep her position as noble consort, much less the position of empress. Actually, he should have been sitting in the Eastern Palace waiting to watch the show, but he couldn't help but leave in the end. He even brought a group of attendants with him to search everywhere. The Imperial Guards had searched for so long without finding anyone. Who knew where that woman, Han Yunxi, was right now? Just how was she? Was she hurt? Such a big thing had happened. Yet Imperial Uncle Qin still hadn't shown up. Could it be that he wasn't in the Imperial capital? He was still here a few days ago. If Imperial Uncle Qin went on a long trip, wouldn't he bring along Han Yunxi? Long Tianma couldn't figure it out, so he quickly led people to search everywhere. Long Fei Yi was indeed not in the city. At this moment, he was in a courtyard outside the city. In the dimly lit guest hall, the doors and windows were tightly shut. Outside, the sharp chirping of birds could be heard. This was the signal of the secret guards of the Yu Pavilion. Once the secret guards made such a sound, it meant that something had happened in the residence. In the quiet room, Long Fei Yi stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His entire body exuded a cold aura, making the already cold room seem even colder. The sunlight outside the window slanted in, shining on his cold and hard face, but not into his deep eyes. Beneath his feet was a pile of corpses, all of them slashed by his sword. 2 people stood in front of him. One was the white-robed Duanmu Yao, while the other was Tianshan Kenzo's second-in-command, Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yao's martial uncle, Song Qiuzi. It was only natural that Long Fei Yi would show up to honor his martial uncle's visit. But Duanmu Yao had told him that his master had come and even brought his token. Thus, Long Fei Yi had come in a hurry. Duanmu Yao had said that his master missed him and insisted on coming down the mountain to see him. Logically speaking, his master should have gone straight to the Duke of Qin's estate to see him. But in his current state, it wasn't appropriate for him to show his face in public. Even going to the Duke of Qin's estate was out of the question. Thus, he believed Duanmu Yao when she said he was here. Who knew that he'd come to see his martial uncle Song Qiuzi instead of his master? Tianshan Kenzo had always been the leader of the martial arts circles. Everyone revered and feared them, and it was also the reason why the City of Daughters and Carefree City hadn't dared to stir up trouble. But who would have thought that Tianshan Kenzo had been out of the Kenzo's control for more than a decade? Long Fei Yi knew something was amiss as soon as he saw Song Qiuzi. He wanted to leave, but was blocked by multiple sword experts. He had no idea what had happened at the Duke of Qin's estate, but Han Yunxi was still there. Cold, he looked at Song Qiuzi. Fei has important matters to attend to, so it's inconvenient for him to accompany you today. I asked that Martial Uncle Tsang make things easier for us. Senior brother, I was wrong. I was so happy that I called Martial Uncle Tsang Chiozi Master. Don't be angry. It's rare for Martial Uncle to come down the mountain, so I wanted to invite you for a cup of tea. Why were you in such a rush? Before Duanmu Yao could finish, Long Fei Yi suddenly raised his sword. Like a gust of wind, it slammed into Duanmu Yao's face. Duanmu Yao cried out in alarm. Her entire face burned with pain as if she'd been slapped multiple times. Duanmu Yao couldn't believe it. She covered her face and began to cry. Senior brother, you hit me, you might as well kill me. Otherwise, Master will feel distressed when he sees me. Long Fei Yi didn't spare her a glance, but kept his cool. Martial Uncle Tsang, for Master's sake, I'll have to trouble you to step aside. Tsang Chiozi wasn't as impetuous as Duanmu Yao. He was a man in his 40s with a goatee and hair tied up in a ponytail. He was dressed in long, black robes and simple cloth shoes. He stroked his beard and sighed. Fei, you've grown up. Is it so hard for Martial Uncle to invite you for a cup of tea? Martial Uncle thought you'd be happy to come from so far away. Aya, it looks like Martial Uncle's been imagining things. Although Long Fei Yi had already killed a bunch of Tsang Chiozi's disciples, he still left him some face and spoke politely. Tsang Chiozi was clearly stalling for time. Long Fei Yi couldn't figure out what had happened at the Duke of Qin's estate to make Tsang Chiozi show up in person to lure the tiger away from its den. Had something to do with Tianshan Kinzo? Or had Duanmu Yao asked Tsang Chiozi for help? Tsang Chiozi was a hypocrite, deceitful, and avaricious man, but he was also cautious and reserved. If it wasn't related to Tianshan Kinzo, how could Duanmu Yao have asked him to come down the mountain? What benefits did she give him? But Long Fei Yi had no time to think about that. He only wanted to leave. His heart was flustered, worried that Han Yunshi would be in big trouble. What will it take for Martial Uncle to make things easier for me? Long Fei Yi had no idea that the capital city was in an uproar, much less that Han Yunshi had been assassinated. He was still calm because he couldn't defeat Tsang Chiozi. This fellow's sword skills were second only to his master's, especially this year. Whether it was his internal energy or sword skills, both had improved greatly. It was very possible that he could rival his master now. That was the reason why Long Fei Yi hadn't gotten involved in Tianshan Kinzo's dark dealings. He was busy enough as it was. If he provoked Tsang Chiozi too, he'd be asking for trouble. He hadn't returned to Tianshan Kinzo, nor did he have any major conflicts with Tsang Chiozi. He never expected Duanmu Yao to find someone like this. If he made a move now, he'd only be tied down by Tsang Chiozi. If he wanted to leave, he'd have to use his wits. But Tsang Chiozi's tone turned cold. Fei, Martial Uncle came from afar, but you didn't give him any face. You left in a hurry without even drinking a cup of tea. Martial Uncle is really angry. What do you think we should do? Long Fei Yi's eyes turned then. What does Martial Uncle want to do? Tsang Chiozi was waiting for those exact words. You haven't been back to Kinzo in ages. Your master must be missing you. How about this? I'll test your internal energy on your master's behalf. How will you do that? Long Fei Yi asked. How about you take 3 of Martial Uncle's palms? Tsang Chiozi asked seriously. Is this really a test? It's obvious that he's looting a burning house to hurt me. Tsang Chiozi said such hypocritical words as a matter of course. Of course, Long Fei Yi knew he was harboring ulterior motives. Although his martial arts weren't as good as Tsang Chiozi's and he didn't want to offend him, that didn't mean he didn't dare. If he wasn't in such a hurry to leave today, he wouldn't mind sparring with Tsang Chiozi. But the chirping outside was getting more urgent. He had to leave as soon as possible. All right. Long Fei Yi agreed without hesitation. He sheathed his sword and clasped his hands behind his back, holding his breath as he stood there. Tsang Chiozi chuckled in amusement before suddenly attacking. His figure blurred as his palms shot towards Long Fei Yi's face, striking him viciously. Long Fei Yi's body trembled slightly, but he didn't budge from his spot. Duanmu Yao was alarmed as her heart ached at the sight. She almost begged her martial uncle to stop, but when she thought of Han Yunshi, she held back. She thought that senior brother would be seriously injured after taking 3 of martial uncle's palms. If they didn't stop him, he wouldn't even be able to leave. Abruptly, Song Chiozi's second palm hit Long Fei Ye's back with a thud. Long Fei Ye couldn't take it anymore and spat up a mouthful of blood. Still, he didn't move, his expression cold. Song Chiozi's eyes flashed with astonishment. He never expected Long Fei Ye's internal energy to be so profound. It looks like I'll have to use all my strength for the third palm strike if I want to keep him here. He circled around to Long Fei Ye's side and aimed for Long Fei Ye's heart. Long Fei Ye, long time no see. You've made progress. If your master knew, he'd be happy. Long Fei Ye ignored him. Blood trickled from his lips, but he didn't look wretched at all. Instead, he gave off a dignified air that made him seem untouchable. Song Chiozi stung his eyes as he raised both palms towards Long Fei Ye's chest. Martial uncle, don't. Duanmu Yao cried out, but the palms had already struck. Long Fei Ye was sent flying before crashing into a wall. He spat up multiple mouthfuls of blood as soon as he hit the ground, his entire body dimming. Duanmu Yao's heart ached as she ran over to support him. Senior brother, are you all right? But she hadn't even touched Long Fei Ye before he raised a hand. Scram! He pressed one hand to his chest and the other to his sword as support. Then he stood up with his head held high and his chest puffed out, his bearing extraordinary. Cold, he said, Martial Uncle Song, may we meet again someday. Seeing this, Song Chiozi's heart gave a lurch. He never expected Long Fei Ye to rise to his feet so quickly. His martial arts skills were clearly superior to Long Fei Ye's, but now he was afraid of Long Fei Ye. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Looks like I'll have to be on guard against this guy going back to Kinzo one day to fight for the throne. Song Chiozi wasn't in a position to stop him, but Duanmu Yao was so angry that she stomped her feet. She wanted nothing more than to grab Long Fei Ye back, but she didn't dare. She could only watch as Long Fei Ye left. Meanwhile, Chu Shifeng showed up as soon as Long Fei Ye left the courtyard. He'd been waiting for ages, but Song Chiozi's disciples had stopped him from entering. Long Fei Ye grew alarmed at the sight of Chu Shifeng. What happened? Where's Han Yunxi? Chu Shifeng was the one who made those cries just then, so something big must have happened. Chapter 489. Long Fei Ye was stunned by the sight of Chu Shifeng, but the man was even more shocked. Your Highness, you're injured. Chu Shifeng's heart lurched at the sight of the blood by His Highness Duke of Qin's lips and his ashen complexion. It was obvious that His Highness Duke of Qin had suffered severe internal injuries, or else he wouldn't be in such a state. Chu Shifeng guessed that Duanmu Yao must have invited His Highness here because Tianshan Kinzo's men had shown up. But he never expected them to injure His Highness so badly. It couldn't be the old Kinzo man who doted on His Highness, so who could it be? Long Fei Ye's cold eyes flickered with impatience. Frightened, Chu Shifeng didn't dare to ask any more questions, but quickly handed over the crossbow he'd brought with him. He gave a concise account of Qin Wangfei's visit to the Gu estate, the assassination attempt there, the betrayal of the Imperial Guards, and the commotion in the fireworks district. Before Chu Shifeng could finish, Long Fei Ye had already crushed the crossbow in his hand. His face was so gloomy that it looked like water was about to drip from it. Your Highness, as this subordinate sees it, the Chu clan was behind all this. It must have been Chu Tianin who invited Duanmu Yao. Chu Shifeng had already mulled over the matter multiple times. In the past, he'd found the Western Zhou Imperial clan's rainbow signal flares from Su Xiaoyu's belongings. However, the Western Zhou Imperial clan didn't have any influence in Tianning's capital city, but the Chu clan did. Thus, the Chu clan should have gotten the flares from the Duanmu siblings. A year ago, Duanmu Yao had been crippled by the Western Zhou Imperial clan and had remained in Tianshan Kinzo without making any moves. Now that she'd come down the mountain to find Long Fei Ye, it was clear that she was cooperating with the Chu clan's plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain and plot against esteemed Wang Fei. Long Fei Ye understood all of this at once. He had plenty of time to deal with these people, but the most important thing right now was to find Han Yunxi. Send all the men from the hidden pavilion to the fireworks district. Search every house carefully for your lordship. He gave the orders and left in a hurry, so fast that Chu Shifeng couldn't catch up to him on horseback. Unfortunately, his internal injuries were too severe, so he stopped in less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea to land on a tree trunk and spit up another mouthful of blood. Who was Sangchiozi? He was the second most powerful man in charge of Tianshan Kinzo. Although Cloud Realm's martial arts circles didn't have ranking tournaments, he was definitely the second strongest. Long Fei had taken all three of his palms head-on. His Highnesses was Long Fei Yi, Had Yi, of Long Fei Is of Fei Chu, S, Ziaf of Fei Yezes of him. Long Fei Yi didn't reply, but suddenly flew down from the tree. Long Fei Yi had no choice but to let him have his horse, which he mounted and galloped towards the southern gates. According to Chu Shifeng's explanation, Long Fei Yi was 80% certain that Han Yunqi was still in the fireworks district. The crossbowmen had used the spies in the Imperial Army to betray them. There was no doubt that they were determined to succeed in this assassination. However, they had chosen to take action in the Hidden Gu family and had chosen to withdraw their troops in the fireworks lane. From these 2 points, it could be seen that they were still very afraid of the Imperial Army in the Imperial City. Or rather, it could be said that they were afraid of Emperor Tianhui. They were afraid that the personal grudge of assassinating the Wang Fei would be escalated to a major incident that would endanger the people of the Imperial City and threaten the Imperial Palace. After the black-robed men broke into the brothel, they didn't make any other moves. Either Gu Qisha and Han Yunqi had been kidnapped by them, or they were still hiding in the brothel. Long Fei Yi had always looked down on Gu Qisha, but this time he sincerely hoped that the man could protect Han Yunqi well. Currently, the 4 gates of Tianning's capital city had long been sealed. Without Emperor Tianhui or the Imperial Guard's orders, no one was allowed to enter or leave. By the time Long Fei Yi reached the gates, it was already dark. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu had spent half a day trying to create panic with the crossbow archers, while the other kept lying to Emperor Tianhui about the enemy. Although Emperor Tianhui could tell that the Crown Prince and the General's estate were taking advantage of the situation to exaggerate, the gunpowder incident in the black market made him uneasy. Thus, he ordered the entire city to be on guard and search for the assassins. As soon as the guards on the city walls saw His Highness Duke of Qin, they all fell to their knees. But despite that, no one dared to open the gates. "Open the gates immediately," Long Fei Yi roared. The guard captain was so frightened that he cried out, "Your Highness Duke of Qin, we've already sent someone to ask His Majesty for instructions. They'll be back very soon. May your Highness remain calm." Would Long Fei Yi waste words with him? Obviously not. He leaped from his horse and flew straight to the city gates. Before the guards on the city walls could react, he had already landed in the city. Seeing this, Chu Shifeng, who'd been chasing after him, jumped over the walls as well to lead the way to the Red Lantern District. Less than an hour later, news of the Duke of Qin's return spread throughout the capital. Very soon, news of the Duke of Qin leading a large group of black-robed guards to search the Red Lantern District spread as well. His Highness Duke of Qin couldn't be wrong about the location. Thus, Emperor Tianhui didn't bother to punish Long Fei Yi for his crimes. He sent a large group of men to follow Long Fei Yi to search the Red Lantern District. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu, who were supposed to have left the capital, not only returned, but also sent men from other places to search for the Red Lantern District. A few imperial princes, a few aristocratic families, various dukes, marquises, the Bailey army, the capital governor, and even the justice courts sent men to search for the Red Lantern District. Some of them truly wanted to find Han Yunqi, while others wanted to claim credit from Emperor Tianhui. Others wanted to curry favor with His Highness Duke of Qin. No matter what their motives were, all of them had gathered at the Red Lantern District for the sake of finding a single Han Yunqi. It had to be said that Cloud Realm Continent's history had never seen such a tense situation in any of its capitals except for usurping the throne. Nor had so many forces gathered at the same time in the history of Cloud Realm Continent's brothels. Tianning's capital city was already filled with fear and trepidation to begin with, but His Highness Duke of Qin's return had turned it into an uproar. Long Fei Yi went straight to the brothel where Gu and Han Yunqi were hiding. Long Tianma, Mu Qingwu, and the rest had also arrived with news. By now, all of the guests had fled the place. Only the procuress, the girls, and a few page boys remained. Imperial Qin Uncle, Your Highness Duke of Qin. Everyone paid their respects, all of them wanting to report the situation. Long Fei Ye's internal injuries were severe, and he'd run all the way here. Blood and qi were roiling in his 5 viscera and 6 bowels, but he forced down the taste of blood in his throat. His face was pale white and cold. He ignored the crowd and ordered the secret guards to surround the brothel and search carefully. He strode into the brothel and searched the rooms one by one. He didn't even miss the storage room and the small hall. Seeing this, Long Tianma and the rest followed suit, searching from different floors and directions. Unlike the rough and simple kicks of the soldiers, they were silent and careful, afraid of alerting the enemy. A tense atmosphere filled the entire brothel, but the people in the corner rooms on the top floor had no idea what was going on outside. Only then did they breathe a sigh of relief. By now, Han Yunxi had finished treating Gu's wounds on his back. He had too many wounds, and 5 of them needed to be stitched up. Fortunately, she'd moved quickly, and the hemostatic medicine in her medical pouch was effective enough to prevent him from losing too much blood. Of course, Gu's body was in excellent condition as well. It had to be said that she'd expended a great deal of effort to bandage his wounds. These wounds were both small and numerous, so she could only stick gauze on them one by one and seal them with medical tape. Then she wrapped a layer of white gauze around them to protect them from causing unnecessary damage. After she'd bandaged his wounds, Gu's originally well-built and well-defined upper body had become as bloated as a dumpling. When everything was finally done, Han Yunxi sighed in relief and patted the dumpling gently. "Hey, your body is unusually good. I thought you would have fainted before I finished treating your wounds." "Haha, these wounds are nothing. A few more stabs won't be a problem," Gu said, pretending to be brave. Han Yunxi snorted. In her opinion, Gu was already at his limit. If he didn't faint after a few more stabs, he must be a monster. She tidied up the medical pouch and the blood stains, then asked casually, "I heard that you're the adopted son of the Medical Academy's first elder, and that you were raised with medicine. Is that true?" A trace of hatred flashed across Gu Qisha's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. He joked, "Why else would my body be so good?" As he spoke, he prepared to turn over, but Han Yunxi gently pressed him down. "Don't move around. These wounds will take at least 2 days to form a scab. Don't move around. There's too many wounds. You'll tear them apart if you move. If you bleed again, even the Medical Academy's first elder won't be able to save you," Han Yunxi said sternly as she pulled the covers over him. All right, I'll just lie there for 2 days." Gu Qishao secretly rejoiced. He was eager for Han Yunxi to make him lie on his stomach for half a month. That way, she'd be able to stay by his side for half a month. Of course, he knew they couldn't stay here for long, but he figured that Long Fei Yi had been lured away by Duamu Yao. With the Imperial Guards and Chu Shifeng's skills, they'd probably have to wait until tomorrow to search the area again. Perfect. He could spend the night alone with his poison lass. He still hadn't told her about the antidote for broomcorn millet poison yet. After making sure that Gu wasn't moving around, Han Yunxi got off the bed. She wanted to pour some hot water for Gu to drink and find some food. She wasn't planning to go back so soon, because there were many things she needed to ask Gu Qisha. For example, why was he hiding his identity? Could he think of a way to help her find the person who'd bought the antidote for broomcorn millet poison? Just what kind of grudge did he have with Medicine City? He had such shocking medical talents and spent so much time and effort to establish Medicine Ghost Valley. Why did he choose to do evil instead of doing good? There was one more thing she remembered. When she'd been kidnapped by Jun Yixie's poison humans, this guy had saved her for a reason as well. As soon as Han Yunxi got off the bed, Gu immediately noticed the arrow wound on her other shoulder. Earlier, the two of them had been too busy avoiding the black-clothed experts to notice it. Later, Han Yunxi had been kneeling behind them the entire time, and he hadn't noticed it. As for Han Yunxi, she'd been in a hurry to treat Gu's wound and had only relaxed now. She'd long forgotten about the pain and hadn't even noticed that her clothes were disheveled. Now, she even got off the bed barefooted to pour some water. How could Gu care about how beautiful her collarbone was or how pretty her jade feet were? Looking at Han Yunxi's cold, stern face, Gu Qishao's heart felt like it had overturned a bottle of mixed feelings. Ever since he'd teased her until her eyes had turned red, she'd been very serious and calm. But in reality, she was still worried about his injury. After pouring the water, Han Yunqi took a sip to make sure it was warm before bringing it to Gu. Gu suddenly sat up, startling Han Yunqi. "What are you doing? Be good, don't move." Gu Qixiao gently caressed the wound on her shoulder, but the door to the room suddenly flew open. Chapter 490. The door suddenly opened. Before Han Yunqi and Gu could react, Long Feiyi walked out from behind the screen. The room was filled with an ambiguous atmosphere. The clothes on the floor were disheveled, and the room was filled with the fragrance of life. Han Yunqi's long skirt was pulled up high, exposing her calves and jade-like feet. Her top was wrapped up to her chest, leaving her shoulders and arms bare. Her hair was loosely tied up behind her back. Gu's slender legs were bare, and his upper body was completely naked. His hand was resting on Han Yunqi's shoulder. Long Feiyi was stunned. He didn't move, and his face was expressionless. After he swept his gaze over the two of them, he stared coldly into Han Yunqi's eyes. He didn't react for a long time. Han Yunqi and Gu were also very surprised. They originally thought that the intruder would be a soldier. They never imagined that it would be Long Feiyi. Didn't this guy leave the city with Duanmuyao? When did this guy come back? How did he find this place so accurately? Han Yunqi's mind was filled with surprise. After all, she had steeled her heart to believe that Long Feiyi and Duanmuyao had left. Based on how hurried they were, it would take at least 2 or 3 days for them to return. The room was silent. The three of them didn't speak. Time seemed to have stopped, and everything seemed to have fallen silent. However, Long Feiyi was even more silent than everything else. His silence was frightening. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps outside broke the tense atmosphere. "Ning Jing, someone was coming." Long Feiyi expressionlessly turned to leave. When he reached the door, he suddenly slammed it shut. Bang! The entire room shook. Han Yunqi and Gu both jumped in fright. Only then did they come to their senses. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu's voices came from outside. "Imperial Uncle Qin, how is it inside?" "Your Highness Duke of Qin, is there anyone inside?" "No." Long Feiyi answered coldly without any hesitation. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu didn't delay and went to the other side to search. Long Feiyi stood at the door, and his whole person suddenly dimmed. His deep eyes were so dark that there wasn't a trace of light, as if they were bottomless pits. He cared so much about that he was angry when she took off her shoes and stockings, and he cared so much about her body that he still did not touch her. But now, she was practically naked with another man in the same place. What did they do? How long did they stay like this? Long Feiyi's hands gradually clenched into fists, and the veins on his back popped out one by one. His monstrous anger intensified the churning of his internal organs, and his tall and proud body actually gave people the feeling that he was about to collapse. But he didn't have to wait long. When the corridor was empty, he viciously punched the door. "Han Yunqi, you're still not coming out." Han Yunqi panicked when she saw Long Feiyi swinging his sword at her again. She went mad with anxiety as well. "Long Feiyi, if you want to kill him, kill me first." Long Feiyi froze at her words. Blood roiled in his veins, but he forced it down. His handsome brows furrowed as he stared fixedly at Han Yunqi. Han Yunqi averted her gaze. How was she speaking the truth? She only wanted these two men to calm down. "Long Feiyi, we only..." She was about to explain when Long Feiyi's lips suddenly curled into a mocking smile. "Han Yunqi, this prince has overestimated you." Han Yunqi's heart tightened. She clearly wanted to explain, but when she saw the mocking smile on his lips, her nose turned sour and she suddenly fell silent. "Long Feiyi, what do you mean by that?" "Long Feiyi, what do you mean by smiling so disdainfully?" "Long Feiyi, do you know how upset I was when you whispered in Duanmuyao's ear and left with her without any explanation? You clearly know that Duanmuyao likes you." "Long Feiyi, why are you always not here when I need you?" "Long Feiyi, do you know that it was Gu who risked his life to protect me? Why don't you ask us how we escaped from those crossbow archers?" "Long Feiyi, why is there so much in your world that you can't tell us? But in my world, You have to forcefully interfere. Seeing Han Yunxi's despairing expression, Gu's heart ached so much that he was speechless. He threw caution to the wind and circled his arms around Han Yunxi's waist from behind. Poison lass, I'll take you away. In your dreams. Long Fei snorted coldly. The blade of his sword circled around Han Yunxi and pierced towards Gu's glabella, who knew that Han Yunxi would suddenly raise her hand to block. Long Fei couldn't stop in time, and the blade grazed her hand. Blood splattered everywhere, and her flesh was torn open. Long Fei was shocked and immediately withdrew his sword. Gu was also shocked. He pulled Han Yunxi behind him and shouted angrily, Long Fei, do you know that there's still an arrow in her shoulder? Long Fei was mad with anger. He had seen it earlier but didn't realize that it was an arrow wound. He looked towards Han Yunxi's shoulder and couldn't see the wound, only the bloodstains on her clothes. That glaring red calmed him down a lot. He went forward to look at Han Yunxi's hand, but Han Yunxi hid behind Gu and didn't look at him. This woman's gaze was always chasing after him. Even if her body was hiding from him, her gaze wouldn't leave him. When had she ever avoided him like this? Long Fei's blood was boiling, and there was an indescribable bitterness in his heart. After a moment of silence, he said indifferently, Come here. But Han Yunxi's heart was truly hurt. She couldn't accept the sneer on his lips, so she remained silent and looked away. Gu gave a soft snort and prepared to take Han Yunxi away when Chu Shifeng burst into the room with a few guards. Chu Shifeng gave a start at the sight. He glanced at the mess of clothes on the floor and almost misunderstood. But upon closer inspection, he realized that the women's clothes didn't belong to esteemed Wang Fei, but to the brothel girls. The red robes were most likely Gu's. He had long known that His Highness had figured out that Gu Qisha was Gu and wanted to expose him, but he never expected Gu to suddenly show his face. Fine, he had no idea what had happened either. But he'd found esteemed Wang Fei, and she was safe. That was good. Hearing the commotion, Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu quickly rushed over. When they saw Han Yunxi safe and sound and only lightly injured, they all exhaled in relief. Esteemed Wang Fei, we've finally found you. Are you all right? Mu Qingwu couldn't hide his concern. Her hand and shoulder are both injured. Imperial uncle, hurry and call for an imperial physician, Long Tianma said anxiously. The two of them were the main force in the hunt for the crossbow archers. They should have been asking about the black-robed assassins and the crossbow archers' whereabouts, but all their attention was on Han Yunxi instead. Instead, it was the two junior officials from the justice courts who asked, Esteemed Wang Fei, how did you escape from the assassins? When did the crossbow archers escape? Where did they go? Esteemed Wang Fei, did you recognize the black-robed assassin? Han Yunxi completely ignored them as she stared silently out the window. Gu's face was full of disdain as he assumed they were all good-for-nothings and good-for-nothings. Meanwhile, Long Fei was staring at Han Yunxi with an ugly expression. Chu Shifeng finally sensed something amiss and thought that something must have happened to the three of them. Otherwise, with His Highness's personality, he'd be in such a hurry to find them. He'd be holding them in his arms long ago. Everyone watched and waited, but the people involved remained silent. The mess of clothes on the ground and Gu's bare upper body made for an unsightly sight. Chu Shifeng wanted to break the silence, but Long Fei only said in a cold voice, Chu Shifeng, take Wang Fei back to the estate first. Before Chu Shifeng could even move, Han Yunxi had already headed outside. Gu Qishao grew anxious. Is this silly lass really going back inside? He hurried after her. With so many people around, it wasn't good to make a scene. Otherwise, Han Yunxi would be the subject of all sorts of rumors and slanders again. Chu Shifeng knew that His Highness Duke of Qin wouldn't easily let off anyone involved in the assassination attempt, but he was worried about His Highness's internal injuries. Your Highness, treating your injuries is more important. After reminding him in a low voice, he hurried after esteemed Wang Fei. But esteemed Wang Fei didn't return to the Duke of Qin's estate. Instead, she said, back to the Han estate. Chapter 491. Return to the Han estate? Chu Shifeng almost burst into tears at those words. He wanted to coax her, but didn't know how. He wanted to go back and tell His Highness Duke of Qin, but hesitated. Right now, the brothel was surrounded by a crowd of commoners, soldiers, and soldiers. Countless pairs of eyes were watching. If he failed to coax esteemed Wang Fei and angered her instead, she'd lose her temper in front of the gates. Wouldn't that be a joke? But if he went to tell His Highness Duke of Qin, who was on the verge of a breakdown, what if he lost control and rushed out to force esteemed Wang Fei to return to the estate? With Gu in the mix, they'd be nothing but a laughingstock. Rumors would spread like wildfire. Although Gu Qixiao was heavily injured and wrapped up in white bandages, he still wasn't wearing a shirt. Of course, esteemed Wang Fei had saved him in a moment of desperation. That didn't count for much since he was only half naked. But this was a brothel. It was a very sensitive place. Now that Gu Qixiao had walked out with esteemed Wang Fei, it was inevitable that people would be curious as to how he'd saved her, how long they'd been in the brothel, when the assassins had left, and why esteemed Wang Fei hadn't called for help yet, and so on. Once people started asking questions like these, they'd be filled with all sorts of suspicions that would turn into rumors. Chu Shifeng knew that the wisest choice right now was to make esteemed Wang Fei and Gu disappear from everyone's sight as soon as possible. Then he'd shift everyone's attention to the problem of capturing the assassins. After all, there was still no news of them. Chu Shifeng was about to make a decision when a commotion arose from the crowd. Qi Big Brother, what's wrong? Qi Big Brother, who hurt you? Qi Big Brother. Mu Linger struggled to get to the front of the crowd, but was stopped by the soldiers with their spears in the end. She'd heard that Han Yunqi was in trouble this morning at the inn, so she'd come to Smoke Alley to help search for her. After all, Han Yunqi had saved her once, so she had to repay her debt. Who would have thought that he would actually see Qi Brother, who was heavily injured and wrapped up in bandages? Others might not be able to tell, but as a genius in the medical field, she could tell at a glance that Qi Brother had suffered a terrible injury. If he was not injured in the back, he must have been injured in the front. Otherwise, no quack doctor would wrap him up like a dumpling. Gu and Han Yunqi were both surprised and turned to look at Mu Ling-er. Chu Shifeng was even more surprised. I'm finished. Now that Mu Ling-er was here, there was no lack of excitement. When she saw Gu looking at her, Mu Ling-er became even more anxious. She was so anxious that tears almost fell from her eyes. She threw caution to the wind and kicked away the soldiers who were blocking her as she dashed towards Gu. The officials on the side were furious. They were about to arrest her when a single look from Han Yunqi froze them in place. As soon as Mu Ling-er drew near, she saw that Gu's wound was on his back. The wound had been torn open, and the blood hadn't stopped flowing. She circled around him, too flustered to know what to do. She'd waited and searched for him for so long, but now he was seriously injured. Gu ignored her and was about to urge Han Yunqi to leave when Mu Ling-er suddenly lost her temper. Han Yunqi, it's you again. Silence fell upon the crowd at her words. Han Yunqi was completely disappointed. She didn't react to Mu Ling-er's yelling, but murmured to Gu, hurry and find Imperial Physician Gu to treat your wound. I owe you this time. What about the wound on your shoulder? Gu was still worried about that. Han Yunqi smiled and mimicked him with a proud expression. This old lady won't die. She prepared to leave as soon as she finished speaking, but Mu Ling-er blocked her way. Han Yunqi, just what happened? Speak clearly. How did Qi Big Brother get hurt like this? Mu Ling-er's first words had silenced the crowd, but her second brought whispers to the crowd. Chu Shifeng wished he could muffle the damned girl's mouth. But how could the impulsive and straightforward Mu Ling-er ever consider the consequences? She was very, very angry right now. Last time at the Sky Pit, she assumed that Qi Big Brother was interested in the poison beast, but after finding out about Han Yunqi's bet with the Medical Academy's third elder, she realized that Qi Big Brother was looking for the poison beast for Han Yunqi's sake. Qi Big Brother had suffered a lot in the snake den at the Sky Pit. This time, it was because of Han Yunqi again. When she recalled how Han Yunqi had said that she wasn't familiar with Qi Big Brother and didn't know where Qi Big Brother was, Mu Ling-er's rationality would have long been eaten by a dog. Once one's heart was tired, many things were easy to do. Han Yunqi remained silent. She circled around Mu Ling-er and prepared to leave. Mu Ling-er wanted to stop her, But Gu suddenly pulled Mu Ling into his arms and laughed out loud. Lass, esteemed Wang Fei rewarded me with 30,000 taels. How about I split half with you? What kind of play was he singing? Even Mu Ling was stunned, to say nothing of the crowd. Chi big brother, did you lose your mind because of the pain? What are you talking about? Your Chi big brother and I were playing in the building when I saw the man in black and esteemed Wang Fei being chased by an assassin. Esteemed Wang Fei said that as long as this old man saved her, she would reward me with 30,000 taels. Gu smiled and looked at Han Yunxi. Esteemed Wang Fei, although you helped me apply medicine, you can't miss out on a single tael of 30,000 taels. Han Yunxi looked at Gu's heartless smile and inexplicably felt like crying. She knew that this guy was protecting her reputation. He was the one who often teased her and spoke nonsense in front of everyone. He was also the one who belittled her. Okay, I won't miss out on a single tael of 30,000 taels. I'll ask His Highness Duke of Qin for it later. Han Yunxi replied loudly. Mu Ling wasn't an idiot. She knew that Chi big brother was spouting nonsense, but she wasn't smart enough to consider the consequences of such a public uproar. She was about to speak again when Gu tilted his head to look at her with a piercing gaze. In a low voice he said, "Shut up." Mu Ling really did shut her mouth. Although the man she loved was holding her, she felt like he was a stranger to her. So unfamiliar that she was afraid. With Gu's explanation and his embrace of Mu Ling, both commoners and officials were all watching. What kind of rumors could there be? Chu Shifeng never expected things to take such a turn for the better. Thrilled, he shouted, "Su Donglin, escort esteemed Wang Fei back to the estate. Everyone else, keep searching." His Highness Duke of Qin said not to let a single assassin escape. Han Yunxi silently boarded the carriage. As soon as she sat down, she realized she'd forgotten her medical pouch, but she didn't go back to get it. Instead, she glanced upstairs and said, "Let's go." Chu Shifeng didn't know whether esteemed Wang Fei meant going back to the Duke of Qin's estate or the Han estate. He only hoped that Su Donglin could coax esteemed Wang Fei back to the Duke of Qin's estate. He didn't dare tarry and quickly went back upstairs. After all, His Highness's internal injuries were very serious, so he couldn't stop worrying. As soon as Han Yunxi left, Gu left with Mu Ling in his arms. Everyone's focus shifted to catching the assassins. After all, His Highness Duke of Qin was still in the brothel. Inside the brothel, Long Feiyi, Long Tianma, Mu Qingwu, and the rest were all gathered in a room. Many of them had asked Qin Wang Fei about the whereabouts of the assassins, but she'd left without saying a word. Many of them were displeased with her decision, but none of them dared to show it, because everyone could see that His Highness Duke of Qin's expression was very ugly. Currently, Long Feiyi was sitting on the messy bed and cleaning up Han Yunxi's medical pouch. A few gauze, cotton swabs, and other small items had fallen onto the bed. He carefully inspected each item before placing them into the pouch. His movements were very, very slow, and he was as quiet as an abandoned person. Everyone present wanted to ask him about the assassin's whereabouts, but no one dared to rush him. A long while later, Long Fei finished packing up the medical pouch before rising to his feet. Gu Qisha lured the assassins away. Judging from the time the city gates closed, those archers should still be in the city. His voice suddenly turned cold. "Search from house to house for your lordship. This soldier obeys." Mu Qingwu was the first to carry out his orders, followed by the crown prince. Everyone else left in a hurry as well, afraid that someone else would find the archers first. His Highness Duke of Qin was right. After esteemed Wang Fei's accident at the Gu estate, Mu Qingwu had ordered the city gates to be sealed as soon as he arrived. It was only after the gates were sealed that something happened in the fireworks district. This meant that the archers were still in the city. As long as they were sure they were still in the city, it was only a matter of time before they found them. Once everyone was gone, Long Feiyi ordered his guards, "Take care of the things on the bed." The guards were puzzled. What else was on the bed besides the quilt? But when they walked closer for a closer look, they discovered a large black robe and a pair of imitation gloves. The robe was covered in blood and looked frightening. Without a doubt, Gu had left them behind. Long Feiyi had hardly left the room when Chu Shifeng arrived. "Where are they?" Long Feiyi asked. This subordinate had Su Donglin send them back. Chu Shifeng really didn't dare to mention the Han estate at a time like this. "Let's go back first," Long Feiyi murmured. He walked very slowly, one hand clutching his medical pouch while the other rested on his sword. Chu Shifeng's heart grew alarmed, but he didn't dare to make a sound. Long Feiyi climbed into the carriage and finally couldn't take it anymore. He leaned weakly against the pillow and closed his eyes. Once the carriage was far away, the two junior officials from the justice courts emerged from the building. "Looks like we'll have to search for them ourselves." "Hee, the Duke of Qin is in a hurry to go back and comfort that woman. How could he possibly go after the assassins? Don't you think His Highness Duke of Qin is acting strange today? Even if he's strange, it's none of our business. Hurry up and search. This case will fall into the hands of our justice courts. If we can't solve it then, we'll all suffer." They were almost at the Duke of Qin's estate when Chu Shifeng peeked into the carriage and saw the Duke of Qin hugging his medical pouch as if asleep. Chu Shifeng didn't dare to disturb him, but kept moving forward. He had no idea who was still in the brothel, but he knew that once news of His Highness Duke of Qin's injuries spread, both the assassins and Emperor Tianhui would seize the chance to make trouble for him. Now that all 4 city gates were shut, the assassins could only hide and not escape. Let Emperor Tianhui search for them. His Highness had to treat his injuries first. Chu Shifeng was more concerned about whether esteemed Wang Fei had returned to the Duke of Qin's estate. He was apprehensive the entire way, but when he saw Su Donglin and the carriage at the gates, his heart finally settled back down. Unexpectedly, Su Donglin rushed over as soon as he saw him. "Boss, esteemed Wang Fei went to the Han estate. I couldn't stop her. What do we do?" Inside the carriage, Long Feiyi's eyes flew open. Chapter 492. That woman went to the Han estate. Long Feiyi's heart had finally calmed down, but now it flared up again. He told her to go back to the estate, but she went to the Han estate instead. What did she mean by that? Was she not planning to go back to the Duke of Qin's estate? Did she want to leave him? Long Feiyi was so angry that his cold face seemed to be covered in a layer of frost. He emanated a frightening aura of danger and almost crushed the medical pouch in his hands, but he didn't say a word. Outside the carriage, Chu Shifeng was trembling with fear. He didn't know if His Highness had heard Su Donglin's words, but he still had to report it. After all, His Highness had left the task of escorting esteemed Wang Fei back to the estate to him. Chu Shifeng glared at Su Donglin a few times before gathering his courage to speak. But Long Feiyi suddenly said coldly, "Why aren't you going in yet?" Frightened, Chu Shifeng quickly drove the carriage through a side door. As for whether His Highness was going to find someone, he didn't dare to ask. But somehow, he felt like His Highness would tell him something. Unexpectedly, Long Feiyi went straight back to his quarters and shut the doors. He didn't say a thing. Zhao Mama, Bailey Mingxiang, and Su Xiaoyu blocked Chu Shifeng's way, but all 3 of them were concerned about different things. "Where's esteemed Wang Fei? Didn't they say she was saved?" Zhao Mama asked anxiously. Su Xiaoyu was curious. "Guard Chu, did they save that pill fiend too?" Bailey Mingxiang, on the other hand, was completely focused on His Highness Duke of Qin. She discovered that his complexion didn't seem very well and was rather pale. Chu Shifeng didn't answer a single question, but jumped out from between the 3 women and went straight to the Han estate. Although there were guards there to protect him, it was better for him to go personally. The assassins wouldn't dare to make a move now, but what if? Actually, Chu Shifeng wanted to tell esteemed Wang Fei that His Highness Duke of Qin had suffered serious internal injuries. Unfortunately, he didn't dare to speak too much about His Highness's affairs. At this moment, Han Yunqi was in the leisure cloud park of the Han family. After Madame Hellion became the head of the household, she renovated the Han residence and rented out all the empty courtyards, leaving only 3 courtyards, one of which was reserved for Han Yunqi. Because Han Yunqi's courtyard in the Duke of Qin's mansion was called Leisurely Cloud Pavilion, she reversed the 2 characters Leisurely Cloud and named it Leisurely Cloud. Madame Hellion and little were standing guard at the door. Even now, they were still confused and had no idea what had happened. The Princess Consort had been saved, so why was she here? Madame Hellion had already tried to persuade him several times. Helpless, she could only keep winking at little ear, asking him to persuade him. Sis, open the door. Big sister, did His Highness Duke of Qin bully you? Sis, please open the door. Ear is begging you. Finally, Han Yunshi spoke up. Seventh Madam, all of you should go and rest. I'm tired and want to sleep. Madame Hellion had no choice but to leave with little ear. After calming down, Han Yunshi finally exhaled. Unfortunately, her heart was still stifled. She hugged her knees and sat on the couch. Her head was heavy and in a mess. From the assassination attempt at the Gu estate to Gu Qishao saving her, to the betrayal of the Imperial Guards, to Gu Qishao taking her away, to Gu Qishao revealing his true face, to Gu Qishao's serious injuries, to Gu Qishao's urgent treatment, and then Long Fei's appearance. Everything had happened so quickly that she still hadn't recovered her senses. She only felt like she was in a dream. In her dream, Long Fei had returned, but it wasn't a beautiful dream. She knew that Long Fei would be angry if she shared a bed with Gu with her disheveled clothes. Anyone would be angry. But why didn't he listen to her explanation? He clearly knew that she had been attacked, didn't he? He clearly saw that she and Gu were both injured, didn't he? She had applied medicine for Gu with her disheveled clothes. She really deserved to die. But she was really anxious at that time and forgot. It wasn't intentional. As a doctor, she was anxious in the face of such a terrible injury. Besides, Gu was injured because of her. Why didn't Long Fei think about it? If it wasn't for Gu, would he have come back to collect the corpse? Right and wrong, scene after scene flashed through Han Yunshi's mind. However, the one that repeated the most was Long Fei's disdainful sneer. Long Fei, because I like you. I'm so proud that I can lower myself to the ground. But you can't look down on me like this. What kind of woman do you take me for? What kind of woman do you take me for? The more Han Yunshi thought, the more her head hurt. Gradually, she closed her eyes and fell to the side. She was so preoccupied with Gu's injuries and Long Fei's anger that she forgot about the wound on her shoulder. Even now, she hadn't pulled out the arrow from her shoulder. The wound wasn't bleeding, but it was already inflamed. Her head hurt not only because she was vexed, but because she had a high fever. Yeah. The window was carefully pushed open as a furry little head poked out. It was none other than Lil Thing. When it saw that Mama Yunshi was asleep, it crept closer. But it quickly realized that something was wrong and was about to call for help when the white-robed man entered. Chi-Chi. Lil Thing cried out anxiously. Sure. The white-robed man gently motioned for it to quiet down. Lil Thing really did quiet down and obediently jumped onto the windowsill to stand guard. Actually, it and the gentleman had found Mama Yunshi before His Highness Duke of Qin, but the gentleman hadn't shown himself. Lil Thing panicked and quickly leapt onto the roof. Fortunately, he was standing right there. Naturally, Lil Thing had to stay behind to protect Mama Yunshi, but it had something to tell the gentleman. It quickly scurried onto his shoulder and dug out a clot of congealed blood. Cheep cheep, cheep cheep. This was Gu's blood. It had long sensed that something was off about Gu, but never expected his blood to be so delicious. It didn't know what was wrong with the blood, nor could it tell that it was poisonous, but it made its mouth water as soon as it smelled it. It really was delicious. Seeing this, the white-robed man smiled and took out a clot of blood as well. You noticed it too? Lil Thing was stunned. Cheep cheep, cheep cheep. A poison Gu human with an undying body. That child from the medical academy. It really was him. The white-robed man's expression grew heavy. It was precisely because he discovered Gu's undying body that he hadn't made a move. If an undying poison Gu human couldn't protect her, who else in the world could? But was it a blessing or a curse to be friends with this ruthless poison Gu human who didn't care about the world? Sensing the approaching guards, the white-robed man set Lil Thing down and quickly vanished from sight. Lil Thing cradled the clot of blood and wanted to hide it from Mama Yunshi to see, but when it remembered that Mama Yunshi's skills were limited and she wouldn't be able to tell, it simply swallowed it whole. So delicious. Chu Shifeng and a few of his guards patrolled the area before vanishing back into the shadows. That very night, while the guards were still patrolling the area, Gu Qishao openly showed up with Lady Hellion. He was still dressed in his usual flirtatious red robes that hid the numerous wounds on his back. Aside from his slightly pale face, he looked just like a normal person. Lady Hellion had no idea what the truth was, but she'd heard rumors outside that Gu had saved esteemed Wang Fei. Thus, she treated Gu with extra courtesy. Sir Gu, esteemed Wang Fei's been shut up in her rooms ever since she arrived. She refuses to see anyone, Lady Hellion said anxiously. Gu was alarmed. Didn't anyone treat your wounds? Lady Hellion was startled as well. Wounds? Han Yunshi had been shot very deeply. Moreover, she'd taken off her clothes and put them back on after being shot, so the arrow was hidden beneath her clothes. It was impossible to tell unless one looked closely. Gu immediately realized what was going on and prepared to kick the door open, but Chu Shifeng suddenly appeared to block him. Gu, don't be so impudent. Chapter 493. Of course Gu knew there would be guards at the Han estate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come here so openly. He chuckled disdainfully. You think you can stop me? Gu, if you really have the skills, then go find those assassins. Stop stirring up trouble here. Chu Shifeng huffed. Gu laughed out loud. So you're saying that Long Fei doesn't have the skills to find those assassins? You're the one who doesn't have the skills. Chu Shifeng raged. So His Highness Duke of Qin has already found them? Gu feigned shock. Chu Shifeng couldn't beat him in words and drew his sword in a fit of rage. Gu's gaze turned cold before he kicked the weapon out of Chu Shifeng's hands. Poison Lass's injury hasn't been treated yet. This old man will deal with you later. Esteemed Wang Fei was injured? Untreated? Chu Shifeng grew anxious as well. He followed Gu to knock on the door, but there was no response. Han Yunshi could naturally hear Chu Shifeng and Gu's voices, but she didn't have time to pay them any attention. She was too busy inspecting the wound on her shoulder. It had to be said that the way the wound had been treated left her astonished. She'd been shot very deeply. The 3-inch bolt had practically sunk into her flesh, but the person who'd treated her wound had pulled out the arrow without even taking off her clothes. They hadn't even cut open the clothes around the wound. How had they done that? Han Yunshi quickly tore off the gauze and took off her clothes to get a better look at the wound. But the sight left her even more stunned. The person who'd pulled out the arrow hadn't stitched it up at all. More importantly, the wound hadn't worsened or bled out. How did they pull out the arrow? Han Yunshi muttered to herself. She suddenly realized that all the stitches she'd stitched up for Gu were too weak. Although the wound had stopped bleeding, it still felt like her flesh had been split open. Han Yunshi quickly rebandaged the wound before putting on her clothes. After she was done, she saw a bottle of medicinal powder and a crossbow wrapped in white gauze on the bedside table. This medicinal powder was actually the famous Guangning Yuji powder. It was a top-grade medicinal powder for blood coagulation and muscle growth. The Han family did not have such a good thing. She looked at the white gauze again. This gauze looked like a mask. There was no pattern at all. She couldn't recognize the head at the moment. Who was the person who treated her wound? Although her head was still a little heavy, it was not as dizzy and messy as it was during the day. Han Yunshi touched her forehead and felt that she had a high fever. Was she unconscious from the fever? Or did someone deliberately drug her? Otherwise, with such a deep wound and the arrow being pulled out, it was impossible for her not to wake up. She looked at the white veil again and thought of that white-robed man. But was that fellow's medical skills that good? His ability to treat wounds was not inferior to Gu Beiyue's. In the midst of her bewilderment, the door to the room was kicked open. Gu, Chu Shifeng, and Lady Hellion all rushed in. Han Yunshi gave a start. They were stunned as well. After knocking for so long, they wondered what had happened to this great aunt. Esteemed Wang Fei, how's your wound? Poison Lass, have you treated your wound yet? Chu Shifeng and Gu were both anxious, but Lady Hellion's eyes were sharp enough to notice the object by the bed. Esteemed Wang Fei, you've treated your wound? With Lady Hellion's words, Han Yunshi was certain that the person who treated her wound wasn't a member of the Han family. A seed of doubt had been planted in her heart. She silently hid the white gauze and said, it's taken care of. The small wound is fine now. You can all leave. Gu examined the wound carefully and saw that it had been treated. Only then did he relax. Esteemed Wang Fei, you should return to the Duke of Qin's estate with this subordinate. His Highness has already gone back, Chu Shifeng urged. He did not dare to reveal that His Highness had suffered internal injuries, but he said that His Highness had already returned to the palace. The Princess Consort should have guessed that something had happened to His Highness. Otherwise, at this critical moment, His Highness would have searched for the assassins and would not have stayed in the palace. Unfortunately, Han Yunxi only pretended not to hear. Seventh Madam, you and Guard Chu should both leave. She wasn't stupid, but too smart. With the city gates closed, the assassins wouldn't be able to escape. If she was the Long Feiyi, she'd return to the estate to drink tea and sleep. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu had already escalated the situation to the point of endangering the capital. In that case, Emperor Tianhui should be the first to worry. The assassination and gunpowder cases were so close to each other that Emperor Tianhui had his own suspects. He'd rather kill the wrong person than the wrong person. Esteemed Wang Fei, you're only leaving Gu alone? Chu Shifeng suddenly broke into a cold, disdainful laugh. Esteemed Wang Fei and His Highness had fallen out because of Gu Qishao, but she still left him alone in a room with a single woman? Did this woman really not know how to avoid arousing suspicion? Or was she really a fickle woman who wanted to have a foot in two boats? Seeing Chu Shifeng's expression, Han Yunxi felt unwell all over. Long Feiyi was doubting her, and now this servant was doubting her as well. Do I need to explain to you what I do? She'd always done things her own way. Back in the medical academy, she'd refused to budge even when the academy head and board of directors threatened her. Ever since she was young, she'd lived 2 lifetimes, but she'd never taken the initiative to explain herself to anyone except Long Feiyi. But Long Feiyi would never listen to her explanations. If not for the fact that she held the title of Qin Wangfei and was afraid of tarnishing it, why would she care about the rules and etiquette of this world? Why were there so many rumors and slanders? She, Han Yunxi, would never give face to anyone, much less this world. Chu Shifeng fell silent. This subordinate has overstepped his bounds. Esteemed Wang Fei, please forgive me. Scram, Han Yunxi said bluntly. Chu Shifeng was both angry and aggrieved as he turned to leave. Lady Helian glanced at Gu and hesitated to coax him, but Han Yunxi turned to cold water and said, "Seventh Madam, you should leave too." Helpless, Lady Helian could only silently withdraw from the room. As soon as she was outside, she chased after Chu Shifeng to put in a good word for esteemed Wang Fei. Perhaps esteemed Wang Fei had left Gu Qishao behind for business, but Chu Shifeng was long gone by the time she ran after him. Heaven knows if Chu Shifeng would complain to the Duke of Qin. Meanwhile, Han Yunxi had left Gu alone in the room because she had business to discuss. "Have you taken care of the injury on your back?" Han Yunxi asked. "Mu Ling's taken care of it. Don't worry. Gu would never seek out Gu Beiwei. What if that guy picked up on some clues?" Actually, he hadn't sought out Mu Ling at all. Once the bleeding reached a certain point, it would stop on its own, so he was too lazy to treat it. Mu Ling had long been poisoned by him and was now sleeping in the inn. Han Yunxi was relieved to see that Gu seemed to be in good spirits. She sat down and fell silent for a while before speaking. Gu Qisha, how should I address you?" She'd remembered the favor of saving her life, but she still had to pay for his deceit. Gu could guess that Han Yunxi had asked him to stay because of that. He grinned as he sat down. Chi Big Brother would be the best. Han Yunxi was in no mood to joke around. She said coldly, "You're investigating my origins too. Why did you bring me to Mute Granny? Why did you fall out with Medical City? Are your poison skills related to the poison sect?" Gu laughed heartily. "Girl, don't you get tired of thinking so much? Answer my question," Han Yunxi said seriously. "Hey, Chi Big Brother, let me tell you something. Before Chi Big Brother met you, he already had 2 identities. The Medical Academy will keep an eye on Gu Qisha, but not on Gu, understand? This is Chi Big Brother's own secret," Gu said with a smile. Han Yunxi understood. Everyone had their own secrets, and there was no need to explain them to anyone. Just like the secret of her transmigration and the secret of her detoxification space, there was no need to tell anyone. She didn't want to pursue these questions, but there was one thing she had to clarify. "Why are you investigating my origins?" she asked sternly. From the time this fellow started to pay attention to her poison skills, to the Tang sect's hidden weapons, to the embroidered words on her medical bag, to investigating Madame Tianxin, to finding Mute Granny from the Mu family. All of this was to investigate her background. Don't think that just because he's always joking around, she'll take him for a fool. This guy still doesn't know that her biological father isn't Hong Kongan, but a descendant of the poison sect. When he first brought her to Mute Granny, he was already suspicious of her relationship with the poison sect. The reason he'd noticed her at first was probably because he suspected that her poison skills were related to the poison sect. Han Yunxi had asked him why he was looking for a descendant of the poison sect. He joked, as a catalyst to refine an antidote. She'd even asked him what kind of poison he'd been afflicted with, and he'd said, "The most poisonous poison in the world." Han Yunxi didn't believe his joke, but she firmly believed that this guy had a motive for getting close to her. This time, Gu wasn't smiling. Instead, he wore a rare expression of seriousness, but he didn't answer Han Yunxi's question. Instead, he said seriously, "Poison lass, trust me. No matter what I do, I won't harm you." Is he trying to brush me off? Han Yunxi was clearly angry, but when she saw Gu's stubborn and sincere gaze, she couldn't bring herself to question him. She was afraid that she'd hurt his heart. Just yesterday, he'd risked his life to save her. What reason did she have to not trust him? Han Yunxi was silent for a long time before she said, "I believe you, but I have the right to know the truth, don't I?" She'd inherited everything from this identity, but she still didn't know the secret behind it. She really was a failure. When he saw Han Yunxi's stubborn and sincere gaze, Gu Qisha suddenly laughed. "Poison lass, you're not the person I'm looking for. This matter has nothing to do with you. You have no right to know." He'd been investigating all this time, looking for the descendants of the poison sect. Ever since Poison Woman and Mute Granny had been imprisoned, all his leads had been cut off. So far, this woman in front of him was the biggest suspect. However, his words today weren't just brushing her off, nor were they a lie. He hadn't just said it for Han Yunxi's benefit, but for himself as well. His poison lass wasn't the person he was looking for. She definitely wasn't. Even if she was, he'd pretend that she wasn't. He had plenty of ways to take revenge on Medical City, but as for the antidote, her existence, every smile, every frown, every word was the best medicine for him. Antidote my ass. It's fine if you don't understand. Han Yunxi was skeptical, but she couldn't refute Gu. He was right. She had no right to know anything that had nothing to do with her. Gu Qishao rose to his feet and stretched lazily. "Poison lass, Chi-Gij likes to joke around, but I've never lied." He turned to leave, but when he reached the door, he turned back and added, "That's right, poison lass. Chi brother really didn't hide the antidote for the broomcorn millet poison." Chapter 494. He didn't keep the 10% antidote for himself? What did he mean? If he didn't keep it, where did the antidote go? Han Yunxi's other reason for keeping Gu Qishao here was to ask him who he'd sold the antidote to back then. Who knew that Gu Qishao would leave her with such a line? Gu Qishao, wait. Han Yunxi chased after him, but Gu Qishao was already nowhere to be seen. She stood at the door in a daze. Her fever and sleeping pills had just subsided, but her head was still a little heavy. She tried to recall what happened with the antidote, but soon her head started to throb. Back at Pill Fiend Valley, she'd used the serpent fruit to calculate the true amount of antidote. Meanwhile, Gu Qishao had used useless medicinal powders to mix with the antidote, causing the inside of the bottle to turn black. This proved that he'd given Long Fei a full bottle. At that time, she didn't think too much about it and immediately assumed that the inner wall of the bottle that Gu had given her was completely black, thus denying Gu's evidence. If Gu had mixed the fake antidote, then so be it. Why did he choose the fake antidote that would react with the porcelain bottle? Why did he have a trick up his sleeve? At that time, She had also thought about this question, but she didn't think too much about it. She just thought that Gu had left this trick up his sleeve so that he could cheat them of the antidote. To be honest, although she had been so serious about the quantity, she didn't want to prove anything. She just wanted to deny Gu. Because before she went to the Medicine Ghost Valley, she had already denied Gu completely. She couldn't possibly doubt her own husband and trust someone who had mixed the fake antidote to cheat them. But what about now? The person who had mixed the fake antidote to cheat them was Gu. It was Gu who had brought her to find Mute Granny. Therefore, Gu had no reason to kidnap Mute Granny and secretly hide the 10% antidote from Mute Granny. 10% of the antidote was just enough to cure the broomcorn millet poison once. If it wasn't Gu, then who had the 10% antidote? What was he going to do with it? Han Yunqi suddenly realized that she was afraid. She didn't dare to think further, nor was she willing to think further. Now it seemed that Gu had purposely used the ineffective powder to blacken the inner wall of the porcelain. Did that guy know something? Gu, come out. Gu, I know you're here. Come out and explain yourself. Gu. Han Yunqi chased him to the courtyard and shouted desperately. Unfortunately, this time, Gu really left. No one responded to her for a long time. Can I pretend to be stupid? Can you pretend you don't know anything? Han Yunqi asked herself in her heart. She had never been a timid person, but this was the first time she felt scared. If the Long Fei Yi had lied to her, then what was the purpose of the Long Fei Yi? She felt like she needed to calm down. She didn't dare to think any further and weakly turned around, only to see a familiar figure standing in front of her door. That tall and proud figure, that cold and stern face, was him, Long Fei Yi. Your Highness. As if out of habit, she couldn't help but call out his name. But as soon as she opened her mouth, she stopped abruptly and chose to remain silent. Long Fei Yi looked at her in silence as well. Dressed in black robes, he emanated a merciless air. The two of them were less than 10 steps apart, but it felt like they were separated by centuries. When you were born, I wasn't. When I was born, you were already old. Time was the greatest distance. Long Fei Yi, if I hadn't transmigrated here, would you have grown old in my world and become history? Would I not be so sad then? Long Fei Yi didn't speak. Han Yunqi's mind was a mess, and her heart was even more confused. She needed to calm down. She turned to leave, but Long Fei Yi suddenly said coldly, "You're looking for Gu?" So Chu Shifeng went back to complain? Thus, it took him an entire day and night to find his way here because of Gu Qixiao? She'd realized she'd left her medical pouch outside the brothel, but purposely didn't go upstairs to get it. Hadn't she left it there for him? She'd left him with a reason to find her. She knew he'd check the room and find the pouch, but he'd only come now because Chu Shifeng had complained. Han Yunqi's heart grew cold. She didn't answer, but turned to leave. Long Fei Yi flew over to block her way. You still haven't answered your lordship's question. Han Yunqi took a deep breath and bowed respectfully. Yes, I'm looking for him. May I ask if your Highness Duke of Qin has any other business? Her reverence was an eyesore to Long Fei Yi. What? You can't bear for him to leave. It looks like your lordship came at the wrong time, he laughed coldly. Han Yunqi's eyes began to sting, but she stubbornly held them back. She gave him a provocative look. Yes, Han Yunqi. Long Fei Yi flew into a rage. He pressed down on her shoulder and gripped it so tightly that he almost crushed it. At this moment, Lady Hellion arrived. Seeing the situation, she cried out in fright, Your Highness Duke of Qin, please have mercy. Your Highness Duke of Qin, esteemed Wang Fei's shoulder is injured. You can't. You can't. Long Fei Yi finally remembered that he'd seen her shoulder injured at the brothel. He abruptly released her, but it was already too late. Fresh blood seeped out from her bandages and clothes to stain his hands. He stared blankly at his bloodied hands, then at Han Yunqi's pale, stubborn face. His heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. He was about to apologize when Han Yunqi smiled, her dimples as beautiful as a flower. Long Fei Yi, everyone can see my injury. You're the only one who hasn't seen it since last night. She said, Your Highness Duke of Qin, if there's nothing else, please do as you please. I'm still in a rush to find Qi brother. Qi brother? Long Fei Ye's entire being emanated a terrifying killing intent. His bloodied hands slowly clenched into fists that crackled as if ready to punch her at any moment. Lady Hellion was scared witless. She gaped and couldn't speak. Han Yunqi's shoulder hurt like hell, but it couldn't compare to the pain in her heart. She didn't say anything else, nor did she want to ask about broomcorn millet poison. She curtsied and turned to leave. Long Fei Yi narrowed his eyes at her retreating form. She was already far away, but he didn't move. It wasn't until Chu Shifeng found him that he recovered his wits. "Your Highness, this subordinate. Chu Shifeng didn't know what to say. He wanted to go back and complain, but he couldn't find His Highness anywhere in the Duke of Qin's estate. He had no choice but to turn back, only to find His Highness at the Han estate. Before Chu Shifeng could figure out the situation, Long Fei had already turned to leave. The hand behind his back had been clutching a medical pouch. If it wasn't Han Yunqi's, who else could it be? "Guard Chu, did you complain to the Emperor? Which servant doesn't want the best for their master? It's fine if you don't try to mediate, but you even added oil to the fire. What are your intentions?" Yunqi definitely isn't that kind of person. She must have something to discuss with Sir Gu. "I'm telling you now, His Highness won't forgive you easily once they make up," Lady Hellion warned angrily. Chu Shifeng felt wronged. "I didn't say anything. I've just found His Highness. Then why are they arguing again?" Lady Hellion huffed. "Go ask your family's great-aunt." Chu Shifeng was filled with grievances and anger as well. He couldn't care less about that now, but he should hurry and chase after His Highness. Who cared if that ignorant woman lived or died? His Highness's health was more important. He'd need 2 or 3 days of closed-door cultivation to treat his internal injuries, or else he wouldn't be able to hold on. With everyone gone, the Han estate resumed its silence. Han Yunqi hid in the medicine room and treated her own wounds. They were very deep to begin with, but Long Fei Ye's pinch had wasted all of her previous efforts. Fresh blood kept flowing out. She used the bottle of medicine left behind by the white-robed gentleman and the Han estate's own medicine to stop the bleeding. Fortunately, the effects were good. After bandaging the wound, she was exhausted and weak. She lay paralyzed in the pile of medicine, unwilling to move. Her head hurt, so she didn't want to think too much. But Mute Granny's incident, Gu's reminder, and Mu Ling, Er's curses kept popping up in her head. As she thought about it, she didn't know why she fell asleep in the end. Lil Thing popped out from the side and looked at Mama Yunqi's injuries with heartache. It had been hiding on the side, itching to bite His Highness Duke of Qin to death, but in the end, it didn't dare. It knew that Mama Yunqi couldn't bear to part with him. It could only obediently curl up by her side. It really wanted the gentleman to take Mama Yunqi away. The gentleman was the last person in the world who'd hurt her. The night was still quiet. All of the capital city was brightly lit, and the Imperial Guards were still searching for assassins from house to house. How many people could sleep peacefully? Not far from the Han estate's medicine room, Gu was lying on a roof with his hands behind his head as he stared at the stars. As he stared, he began to mutter to himself, "Chi be good. Chi be good." When he was young, his father must have coaxed him to sleep like this. It had been a long time since he thought about his childhood, but Poison Lass's questions today made him recall his childhood. He'd already forgotten how old he was back then, only that he was like a wild child who liked to roll up his sleeves and pants and run around the mountain forests behind the medical academy barefoot. Every time his father found him, he'd carry him high up in his arms and ride him on his neck all the way home from hiding in the woods. Back then, he had a strange illness that made it difficult for him to fall asleep. No matter how tired he was from playing during the day, he needed someone to coax him to sleep at night. His father would hold him and call out softly, "Chi be good. Chi be good. Chi be good. Chi be good. Chi be good." But one day, his father suddenly handed him over to the head elder of the medical academy and told him, "Chi has been afflicted with a demonic illness and needs to be adopted by the head elder. In the future, he can only follow the head elder and take medicine every day." His father explained a lot, but Chi didn't understand. Later, he learned that his father was the head of the medical academy and that his reputation was very important. He didn't allow illegitimate children to exist, and his hidden home in the mountains was forbidden to the public because it was a forbidden area of the poison sect. From then on, he became the head elder's adopted son. From then on, he never saw his father again. It was also from then on that he began to take medicine every day for 3 meals. Every time he was about to vomit, his adopted father would tell him that he only had to obediently take his medicine and stay alive to see his father again. He wanted to see his father because he didn't have a mother. He only had one father from the time he could remember. Suddenly, there was a loud bang that shook the entire capital. Goose snapped out of his daze and shot to his feet. Where did that explosion come from? What happened? Send more people to keep an eye on the Han family. After he finished speaking, he entered the palace and did not mention a single word about the explosion just now. Does His Highness Duke of Qin have no opinion on such an important matter? The guard was curious, but didn't dare to ask. He quickly went to find Chu Shifeng. The entire capital city was brightly lit by lanterns. Both the common people and the imperial family were panicking, but Emperor Tianhui was the most panicked of all. He was in the imperial study asking General Mu and Mu Qingwu about the betrayal of the imperial guards when the sudden explosion caused the teacup in his hands to shatter on the floor. General Mu promptly sent someone to investigate. At this moment, everyone in the room was silent. Emperor Tianhui sat upright and still, his hands clutching the armrests of his chair. His cold face was tense and solemn. Since the explosion, he had allowed General Mu to send people to investigate without saying a word. In front of him, Crown Prince Long Tianma, General Mu, and Mu Qingwu all had their heads bowed, their expressions ghastly. Leaving aside the question of who was behind the explosion, Mu Qingwu, the commander of the imperial guards, and the heavy responsibility of protecting the capital and the imperial palace, would be hard-pressed to escape blame. Moreover, Emperor Tianhui had just reprimanded Mu Qingwu over the betrayal of the imperial guards before the explosion. Now that such a thing had happened at such a sensitive time, how could Emperor Tianhui not investigate Mu Qingwu's negligence of duty? In the silent room, Emperor Tianhui's breathing was heavy. Long Tianma and the Mu family were both on tenterhooks and on tenterhooks. The guards hadn't returned yet, so it was unclear what the situation was. Who wouldn't be nervous? Of course, Long Tianma was the most anxious of all. He was feeling uneasy. Over the past 2 to 3 days, he and Mu Qingwu had put in plenty of effort to convince the emperor that the crossbow archers had something to do with the black market gunpowder case. Both of them were a threat to the capital. But someone had whispered something into the emperor's ears, causing him to summon the Mu family to the palace that very night to ask about the betrayal of the imperial guards. Everyone knew that the young commander of the imperial guards had been stabbed to death by Mu Qingwu in a moment of desperation, while the 2 captains had been imprisoned and interrogated. But who would have time to pay attention to such details when the city was still searching for the crossbow archers? The emperor had only asked once before, then told them to use torture to interrogate them. After that, he'd stopped asking. But tonight, he suddenly wanted to ask for more details. Then there was the sudden discovery of the explosion. Wasn't all of this too much of a coincidence? Suddenly, a rush of footsteps broke the silence of the imperial study. The guards who'd gone out to investigate had returned. In a flash, the tense crowd grew even more tense. Just what was the situation? Eunuch Luo hadn't even brought him in before Emperor Tianhui couldn't take it anymore. Where was the explosion? Just what happened? To reply, Your Majesty, it was the military depot on the western outskirts that exploded. The explosion destroyed 2 storehouses full of weapons. We're still counting the casualties, and the military doctors have all rushed back. At these words, Long Tianma, Mu Qingwu, and General Mu all looked up at the same time, their faces pale with shock. The military depot exploded. How could this be? The depot on the western side of the city belonged to the Imperial Guards under General Mu's command. It was a large storehouse for weapons and weapons, an important location that was heavily guarded. How could something like an explosion happen there? Moreover, there were no explosives stored there at all. In Tianning's 3 countries, gunpowder was all in the hands of the military. Tianing country's gunpowder was controlled by General Mu's estate because it was precious and limited in quantity. Unless there was a major war, it was rarely used. Even the cavalry and naval forces could only be transferred from General Mu's estate if needed. Emperor Tianhui looked icily at General Mu, his hawk-like eyes filled with anger and suspicion. Imperial father, these people are too audacious. They dared to challenge our Tianing's military might. As a kin sees it. Before long Tianma could finish, Emperor Tianhui cut him off angrily. General Mu, why would the military depot explode for no reason? Where did the gunpowder come from? Tianing's gunpowder storehouses were scattered all over the country, while the capital was located on the eastern outskirts of the city. Without Emperor Tianhui's permission, even General Mu couldn't use it. Where did the gunpowder in the armory come from? Did someone do it on purpose, or was there a secret stash of gunpowder in the depot that accidentally ignited it? It was hard to say. Imperial father, it must be those people from the black market. They're probably trying to create panic and divert attention, so those archers have a chance to escape. Those people must be accomplices. Imperial father, Tianing's gunpowder controls are so strict. I'm afraid the gunpowder was smuggled in by a foreign power. Long Tianma explained anxiously. Although he didn't specify which country the foreign power was from, a smart person would know without thinking. Such a sensitive matter could only be muddled through trade at the border. Northernly and Tianing didn't have any trade, but Western Zhou and Tianing did. Unfortunately, Emperor Tianhui didn't even spare him a glance. Seeing this, Mu Qingwu grew anxious as well. He was about to speak when General Mu silenced him with a look. In the end, the Crown Prince and the young general were still too inexperienced. Since the Emperor had summoned them to ask about the betrayal of the Imperial Guards, it meant he was already suspicious of them. If they pointed the spear at the Chu clan like before, it would only make the Emperor feel disgusted and suspicious. General Mu stepped forward and fell to his knees. Your Majesty, this soldier is guilty. Seeing this, Mu Qingwu followed suit. Long Tianma's eyes flashed with a complicated look, but he didn't dare to speak. Your Majesty, this soldier neglected his duties and allowed the assassins to run amok. The people's hearts were in a state of panic, and I know it's difficult to escape punishment. Whether or not the military depot was secretly stashed with gunpowder to cause the explosion, or whether or not someone else brought gunpowder to cause trouble remains to be investigated. But no matter what, this soldier is guilty of failing to supervise and protect the depot. These two crimes are heinous and unpardonable. May your Majesty meet punishment. His words sounded like an apology, but he was tactfully explaining the two reasons for the explosion. Emperor Tianhui's anger faded a little, but he still gave a cold snort. So you know you're guilty too. General Mu kowtowed on the ground, not daring to speak. On the side, Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu were even more afraid to speak. Emperor Tianhui clenched his fists and slammed them against the table. After a long silence, he said, Zhen will give you 3 days to investigate this matter clearly. Otherwise, don't think Zhen won't touch you just because you've been an official for 2 dynasties. Thanks to your Majesty for your grace. General Mu thanked him repeatedly. Mu Qingwu, we will also give you 3 days. If you can't catch those crossbowmen by then, I'll give you 3 days. If you can't catch those archers, then you can go accompany your 2 subordinates in prison. Emperor Tianhui said coldly, This soldier obeys. Mu Qingwu was even more afraid to speak. After the 3 of them left the imperial study, they exchanged glances. None of them dared to discuss the matter. It wasn't until they were far enough away that Long Tianma lost his temper. Young general, just what's going on with the defection? Don't tell this crown prince you didn't know. If it wasn't for the defection, how could the emperor have raised suspicions for no reason? Mu Qingwu's gaze was still evasive, but General Mu was serious. Your Highness Crown Prince, the 2 captains of the Imperial Guard are still locked up in the prisons. There's plenty of people who'd like to take advantage of the situation to hit them while they're down. It's inevitable that His Majesty would be suspicious. It's Qingwu's fault for being impulsive. He shouldn't have killed that commander. Since General Mu had already said as much, what else could Long Tianma pursue? He sighed heavily. Right now, the most important thing is to find evidence. As long as we can prove that the military depot didn't have any hidden gunpowder, this crown prince refuses to believe that imperial father will sit still. They even dared to touch the military depot. Humph, those people must be tired of living. It was easy enough to prove that the explosion wasn't caused by the secret stash of gunpowder. The military depot was heavily guarded and filled with people trained by General Mu himself. There was no way they'd betray General Mu. So General Mu was confident that the explosion had occurred outside of the depot. As long as they could find the source of the explosion, the Crown Prince could continue to nip at the Chu clan. For General Mu, who'd been in charge of the gunpowder depot for many years, finding the source of the explosion was easy. But while General Mu and the other two split up, a woman in the Eastern Palace grew frantic. She was none other than Mu Luiyue. What had she done? Chapter 496. At this time, everyone in the palace was in a state of panic because of the explosion. However, Mu Luiyue was more anxious than anyone else. When she first married into the Eastern Palace, she often paced back and forth at the palace gates in the middle of the night, hoping that her husband would return. Later on, she waited until she lost all hope and never waited again. However, tonight, she was pacing back and forth at the palace gates again. She was waiting for the old nanny who had been sent out to scout for information. Why would the well-trained and disciplined imperial army betray the emperor? Why would Mu Qingwu be so rash as to kill that young commander? Why would Mu Qingwu avoid the crown prince's questions? It was because that young commander had been promoted from the Mu family's army to the imperial army. When he was in the Mu family's army, he was often ordered around by Mu Luiyue. Even if he was punished several times, he was still willing to endure. It was because he liked eldest Miss Mu. He was loyal to General Mu's household, but his betrayal was ordered by Mu Luiyue. As the saying goes, even heroes have a weakness for the charms of a beautiful woman and femme fatale. Even the imperial army couldn't kill Han Yunqi. How could Mu Luiyue not be anxious? She was waiting for the results of this explosion. The entire palace was noisy. Everyone was discussing tonight's explosion. Only the Eastern Palace was extremely quiet. Not long after Mu Luiyue married into the Eastern Palace, the Crown Prince no longer lived in the Eastern Palace. Unless he came back occasionally, he would not be seen most of the time. Most of the servants in the Eastern Palace were also removed. In a sense, this place was a cold palace. Mu Luiyue was about to go crazy from waiting in this empty silence. Finally, the old nanny returned. Mu Luiyue rushed over and hugged her. "How is it? How is it? Is that slut dead?" Unexpectedly, the old nanny was about to cry. "Your Highness, we were deceived." "Deceived? What do you mean by deceived? I'm asking you if that bitch Han Yunqi is dead or not." Mu Luiyue was completely blinded by hatred. She was so anxious that she flew into a rage. "Your Highness, it was our armory that exploded. Just now, His Majesty was furious and wanted to punish old general and young general. He ordered them to investigate everything within 3 days, otherwise." The old nanny couldn't continue. She had tried to persuade Her Highness to cooperate with noble consort Chu back then. Unfortunately, she hadn't been able to persuade her. Now, the imperial concubine had been bewitched and had been completely used by noble consort Chu. What? Mu Luiyue was dumbfounded. After a while, she grabbed the old mama's shoulder and shook it hard. "What did you say? Say it again." "Your Highness, it was our armory that exploded. It wasn't the Duke of Qin's residence that exploded." "How could this be? Did you hear it wrong?" Mu Luiyue's face turned pale. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. "It can't be wrong. Your Highness, what do we do now?" The old mama was scared out of her wits. She was worried about the great general and young general situation, but Mu Luiyue was more concerned about Han Yunqi's life or death. How could she know the severity of the black market gunpowder case? How could she have the skills to see the current situation clearly? In her childish mind, her father was so powerful that what could the emperor do to the Mu family if something happened to the armory? Not long after the black market explosion, Chu Qingge had come to find her to discuss murdering Han Yunqi. Chu Qingge had said that it was better to kill a bitch like Han Yunqi by the roots than to plot against her. She agreed with Chu Chinga's ideas too much and gave her plenty of suggestions, but Chu Chinga had rejected all of them. In the end, Chu Chinga had brought up Duanmu Yao, saying that she was His Highness Duke of Qin's junior sister and had ways to lure him away. As long as he wasn't present, it would be easy to kill Han Yunqi. Chu Chinga had said that the Imperial Guards were only spares that would be used as a last resort. Moreover, she'd make sure nothing went wrong and silence the witnesses. She wouldn't blow the matter up. Everything had gone according to plan, but who knew that her big brother would rush back as soon as he returned to the city? By the time His Highness Duke of Qin found Han Yunqi on his way back, Chu Chinga had found her again and said that Han Yunqi had gone to the Han estate. She was plotting a plot to blow up the Han estate. First, she could kill Han Yunqi with the explosion. Second, she could smear the black market gunpowder case on the Han family and accuse them of hiding gunpowder for themselves. Chu Chinga had said that the gunpowder was outside the city. Now that the gates were all shut, it would be difficult to get in. She needed the Mu family's command token. The Mu family's command token was her proof of entry into the army barracks. Her father and older brothers were both soldiers, so she'd spent a lot of time in and out of the barracks. Naturally, she had her own token. The guards at the gates were the Imperial Guards. With her command token, it was possible for them to make things easier for her. She was afraid that the guards wouldn't agree, so she'd given them both a token and a token. Now it looked like Chu Chinga hadn't used the token or token to smuggle the gunpowder into the city, but had taken them to the military depot instead. Esteemed Wang Fei, noble consort Chu isn't at ease. She wants to harm General Mu's estate and the Eastern Palace. We've committed a heinous crime. So what should we do? The old mama sobbed. What are you crying for? My father's there to protect her. We won't die. Mu Luiyue rebuked. She narrowed her eyes and tried to hold back her tears, but in the end, she couldn't. Chu Chinga, you slut. I'm going to kill you, Mu Luiyue angrily shouted. The old mama was frightened and hurriedly hugged her. Nyang Nyang, be careful. His Majesty doesn't know anything yet. If someone hears you shouting like that, it'll be over. Esteemed Wang Fei, this old servant will leave the palace and find the general right now. Mu Luiyue finally calmed down. Hurry and go. When you see my father, tell him I know my wrongs. She thought for a long time before adding, tell him I was so guilty that I wanted to hang myself, but you persuaded me not to. Tell him it's inconvenient for me to leave the palace and ask for his forgiveness, but I'll definitely kowtow to him once I leave. Esteemed Wang Fei, don't worry. This old servant will definitely put in a good word for you. The old mama didn't dare delay and left in a hurry. Mu Luiyue was depressed to death. Now that she'd calmed down, she regretted it all. Currently, Chu Chinga was in an even worse situation than her. Mu Luiyue had father and brother who doted on her and allowed her to do as she pleased. Chu Chinga, on the other hand, had ambitious father and brother who wanted her to sacrifice herself. By the time she heard the explosion, Chu Chinga had already finished bathing and was dressed in Emperor Tianhui's favorite white muslin lantern dress. Currently, she was sitting on the bed hugging her knees, her eyes empty and lifeless. She was very clear on her brother's plans and knew that she wouldn't be able to escape tonight. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what if. What if His Highness Duke of Qin liked her? If His Highness Duke of Qin had liked her, then wouldn't everything have been different today? Wouldn't she have ended up like this? Without all those schemes and machinations, without all the humiliation, and without all the envy and jealousy, she would still be as pure as ice and pure as jade, proud and noble as before. What if His Highness Duke of Qin liked her? Who would dare to force her into this state? Long Fei, if there's a next life, will you like me? Finally, a court lady rushed in with a secret missive. Chu Chinga opened it and glanced at it before burning it. She wrapped herself in a loose robe and hugged herself for a long time before getting off the bed and putting on her shoes. Someone come, arrange a carriage to Profound Dragon Palace. The black stone gunpowder case had thoroughly infuriated her brother. He'd wanted to take Han Yunqi as a hostage to threaten His Highness Duke of Qin, but who knew the assassination would turn out like this? Her brother said that there was no stopping things at this point. He had to use this chance to get rid of the crown prince's wings, the Mu family. Thus, it was time for her to make a sacrifice. She'd been married to Tianning for a while now. Although Emperor Tianhui wasn't feeling well, how could he stop her if she wanted to? Since her brother had sent her a secret missive, Eunuch Luo must have already made arrangements at Profound Dragon Palace. Chu Qingge rode a sedan chair to the gates of Profound Dragon Palace and saw Eunuch Luo waiting outside. Esteemed Wang Fei, His Majesty just came from the imperial study. Things are progressing smoothly. Inside the rooms, everything's been arranged as well, Eunuch Luo said, covering his mouth with a smile. His smile was an eyesore to Chu Qingge, but she remained calm. Since she'd already come this far, her heart should be as still as water and as dead as ashes. With Eunuch Luo's words, Chu Qingge knew that the emperor had grown suspicious of the Mu family today. Naturally, Eunuch Luo was behind the emperor's sudden summons to the Mu family to ask about the betrayal of the imperial guards. Her older brother had said that the emperor had his suspicions about the Chu clan as well. She had to have Eunuch Luo stir things up first before she whispered in his ear. That way, Emperor Tianhui wouldn't be so wary. Chu Qingge personally carried a bowl of ginseng soup she'd prepared beforehand and strode inside. Currently, Emperor Tianhui had just finished bathing and was drinking tea with only a robe draped over his shoulders. After resting for a while, it would be time for morning court. Emperor Tianhui gave a start at the sight of Chu Qingge. Her robes were open to reveal a pure white lantern dress that fell to her chest. Her cold and aloof temperament matched with this kind of clothing actually didn't feel out of place. She had an otherworldly coldness, but also an insufferably arrogant coldness. Emperor Tianhui loved nothing more than this woman's aloof demeanor. What he truly liked was conquering it. Although he was on guard against this woman from the Chu clan, Emperor Tianhui still couldn't stop his heart from throbbing. He stroked his beard and smiled. "Beloved consort, you're up so early today?" Chu Qingge saw the wretched look in Emperor Tianhui's eyes, but forced herself to ignore it. She offered up the ginseng soup and asked, "Qinxia came to disturb you. Isn't your majesty angry?" "Beloved consort, did you make a special trip to disturb me?" Emperor Tianhui asked with a grin. "Something so big happened last night. The Empress Dowager was afraid that your majesty would overwork himself after a sleepless night, so she ordered Qinxia to deliver ginseng soup," Chu Qingge replied neutrally. Emperor Tianhui grew curious. Why would the Empress Dowager let you come? The Empress Dowager and noble consort Xue viewed Chu Qingge as a formidable foe. Emperor Tianhui was well aware of that fact. No one else dared to come, I suppose. The explosion was so loud that it must have happened in the capital. They were afraid that the emperor would get angry and scold them if they came. Chu Qingge spoke bluntly without fear of offending anyone. In truth, the Empress Dowager hadn't let her come at all. Chapter 497. Emperor Tianhui wrapped his arms tightly around Chu Qingge's waist and buried his head in her neck to sniff as if he was addicted. No matter how much he sniffed, he couldn't get enough. His hands were restless as they groped their way up her waist. Chu Qingge raised her head to stare at the ceiling. As Emperor Tianhui reached for a yard after taking an inch, she gritted her teeth harder and harder. Her clothes were stripped off piece by piece as he ravaged her full breasts. A line of clear tears slid down her cold cheeks before she finally closed her eyes. Would she be able to see nothing as long as she closed her eyes? Would she be able to assume that the man on top of her was the same man from her dreams? If it was him, thinking about him, would it not be so painful? Long Fei Yi, Chu Qingge almost cried out, but she held on to her reason. She only dared to say the name in her heart, because she knew that she'd lose everything as soon as she did. She'd also cause trouble for him. Abruptly, a stab of pain came from her lower body. Chu Qingge's eyes widened as her heart shattered from the pain. The pain jolted her awake from her beautiful fantasies to face the cruel reality. Emperor Tianhui had been drooling over her for a long time. Now that he was under the influence of the drug, he was like a wild horse galloping over Chu Qingge's body. Men, especially those in high positions and power, viewed women as playthings in the end. No matter how much they liked a woman, that was all. When their lust flared up and they couldn't hold back their urges, they only cared about enjoying themselves to the fullest. Who cared if you lived or died? Thanks to a certain imperial physician, Tian Hui had already been a vegetarian for 2 months. Now that he'd started eating meat, he was like a ravenous wolf, a tiger, or a leopard. That morning, Chu Qingga's soul had been ravaged to pieces. After Emperor Tian Hui fell asleep, she was like a rag doll whose soul had been sucked out of her. She lay powerlessly on the cold marble floor, unmoving. Only the tears at the corners of her eyes flowed uncontrollably. She knew that from this moment onwards, there was no turning back. She didn't know how long she lay there until the effects of the drug wore off and Emperor Tianhui was about to wake up. She endured the pain and dressed herself before calling for Eunuch Luo to carry him to the bed. Eunuch Luo opened the windows to disperse the aphrodisiac scent in the room as he spoke in a low voice. "Esteemed noble consort, this old servant has already given orders. His Majesty is ill, so he won't be attending morning court today. If noble consort Shui comes over later, this old servant will block her for you. You'd better hurry up and get down to business. If His Highness the Crown Prince comes, I won't be able to stop him." Chu Qingga only nodded and sat on the bed without a word. As soon as Eunuch Luo left, she grabbed the bedding covers, eager to suffocate Emperor Tianhui to death. She was helpless. This was just an impulsive action. She didn't dare and couldn't. She stood guard quietly, her head repeating her elder brother's words over and over again. How to give Emperor Tianhui pillow talk was the key to the overall situation. By the time Emperor Hui woke up that day, Chu Qingga was only wrapped in a silk quilt and nestled in his arms. After a romantic morning, Emperor Tianhui only remembered that he'd enjoyed himself to his heart's content. He'd long forgotten the details. He looked at Chu Qingga's cold, sleeping face and was extremely satisfied. His hand reached out and took advantage of her again. Chu Qingga pretended to wake up in fright and slapped Emperor Tianhui's hand away. "Let go." Even the most favored concubines in the imperial harem, including the empress of the past, didn't dare to refuse him like this. Emperor Tianhui's eyes flashed with indignation, but he didn't speak. His other hand reached out to bully her as well. Chu Qingga kept slapping his hand away and huffed. "Your Majesty, that's enough." "And if Shen says it's not enough?" Tianhui arched a brow. "Then your Majesty can continue. Chen Xie can't escape anyways." Chu Qingga's words were soft, but her eyes were stubborn. Emperor Tianhui liked her haughtiness the most. Instead of getting angry, he laughed out loud. "Fine, fine, fine. Jin will let you off for now." Despite his words, he didn't release her. Instead, he tightened his grip around her. Chu Qingga struggled a few times, but gave up when she couldn't break free. "Your Majesty, do you know what time it is right now?" Her reminder reminded Emperor Tianhui of the morning court session. "What time is it now?" Jin hasn't started morning court yet. He was about to rise to his feet when he felt dizzy. Damn it, Imperial Physician Gu had told him multiple times not to have sex because it consumed too much energy. Why couldn't he resist? "Your Majesty, are you all right? Are you tired?" Chu Qingga asked hastily. How could Emperor Tianhui admit that he was tired? Despite his anxiety, he still sat down. "What time is it now?" "It's already past noon." "Your Majesty, Chen Xie tried to persuade you this morning, but you insisted on having Eunuch Luo cancel the morning court session. Chen Xie knows that today's morning court session is very important after what happened last night." But, as Chu Qingga spoke, she placed a jade hand over Emperor Tianhui's heart and lowered her head shyly. Emperor Tianhui lifted her chin with a grin. "But what?" "Your Majesty." Chu Qingga pouted playfully at him. Emperor Tianhui was in a good mood. A complicated look flickered past his eyes as he probed. "Beloved consort knows about what happened last night as well?" "The explosion was so loud that it must have happened somewhere in the capital," Chu Qingga replied. "About that, what does beloved consort think?" Emperor Tianhui probed again. Someone was secretly hiding gunpowder. As Chen Xie sees it, there's an 80% chance that it's related to the crossbow archers who tried to assassinate Qin Wangfei. Perhaps they were trying to create chaos so they could escape. Chu Qingga's words were exactly the same as the crown prince's. Emperor Tianhui was surprised. He thought this woman would speak up for the Chu clan. Secretly hiding gunpowder? Hee, how could gunpowder be so easy to get? Emperor Tianhui gave a cold snort. Chu Qingge didn't think so. The gunpowder is all in the hands of the military. How could it be hard to get? Emperor Tianhui assumed that Chu Qingge would seize the chance to trample on General Mu's estate, but she scooted by his ear and murmured, "Your Majesty, Chen Xie will tell you a secret. Chen Xie came into contact with gunpowder before I married. Actually, the military's control over it isn't so strict." Now Emperor Tianhui was even more surprised. This woman dared to say such things to him? Wasn't she afraid that he'd suspect the Chu clan? Or perhaps the Chu clan hadn't done anything at all, so they weren't afraid of suspicion. Looking at the beauty's magnanimous eyes, Emperor Tianhui recalled how the Crown Prince and Mu Qingwu had been insinuating insinuations against the Chu clan without any proof. Beloved consort, then as you see it, which military group did the gunpowder come from? Emperor Tianhui asked next. Your Majesty, you can eat carelessly, but you can't speak carelessly. Chen Xie doesn't dare to speak carelessly about such an important matter. So speaking, she added, in any case, it can't escape my Chu clan. Tianning's Mu family, or Northern Li's Yuan clan. Emperor Tianhui looked at her for a long time before suddenly pressing closer. Noble consort Chu, what if the gunpowder really came from your Chu clan? Your Chu clan is skilled in archery, while those crossbow archers are skilled as well. Could all of that be a coincidence? Chu Qingge was furious. If your Majesty already knows the answer, then why ask Chen Xie? You might as well lock Chen Xie up and torture her to prevent that good-for-nothing Mu Qingwu from turning traitor and harassing the people. We still can't catch him. You're saying that Mu Qingwu's a good-for-nothing? Emperor Tianhui couldn't believe it. Mu Qingwu was very bold. Cold, he retorted. Isn't that the case? Even the soldiers he personally led turned traitor. If that's not a good-for-nothing, then what is? Chen Xie didn't believe it at first, but I never expected it to be true. Emperor Tianhui hadn't believed it either. Of course, he was more suspicious of Mu Qingwu's impulsive decision to kill that commander. In some ways, such actions were meant to silence witnesses. Emperor Tianhui looked at Chu Qingge. Although he didn't probe any further, the scales in his heart had tilted to one side. Still, he kept all of this to himself. Ever since the gunpowder incident at the black market, he hadn't expressed his stance on the matter to anyone. He was still observing the situation and weighing the pros and cons. After all, this incident threatened the safety of the capital. In other words, it was a threat to his throne, so he had to be extremely cautious. There were still 3 days left. He wanted to see what kind of explanation General Mu had for the explosion at the military depot. Seeing Chu Qingge's alluring figure, Emperor Tianhui almost wanted to spoil her again. Unfortunately, he didn't have the strength to do so. After teasing her for a bit longer, Emperor Tianhui allowed Chu Qingge to leave. As soon as she left the profound dragon palace, she ran into noble consort Xue, who was waiting outside. So it was noble consort Chu. In broad daylight, this consort was wondering who had such great ability. Noble consort Xue didn't finish her sentence, but her words were full of sarcasm. Without a doubt, she was mocking Chu Qingge for her shameless actions in broad daylight. Chu Qingge had just finished putting on an act in front of Emperor Tianhui and was exhausted. Her heart was filled with bitterness, so the humiliation made her want to cry. She gave noble consort Xue a cold look before turning to leave. Noble consort Xue gave eunuch Luo a meaningful look before realizing something. She quickly left for the Empress Dowager's palace. Chu Qingge was probably behind the emperor's absence from morning court. If the emperor showed favor at a time like this, it'd be disadvantageous for the crown prince and the rest. As soon as Emperor Tianhui opened his mouth, the harem would be filled with infighting. But Emperor Tianhui's health was far worse than expected. He rested for a long time before taking another dose of medicine to recover his strength. As soon as he reached the imperial study, he didn't even bother with the memorials he'd received that morning before issuing orders. Pass on Zhan's verbal decree to summon the Duke of Qin into the palace. Qin Wangfei, too, should be summoned. Emperor Tianhui had been probing all sorts of people, so he naturally wouldn't forget about His Highness Duke of Qin. He wanted to hear what Long Fei thought about the black market gunpowder, the assassination with crossbow bolts, and the explosion at the military depot. The victim of the assassination attempt was his Wang Fei, but Long Fei hadn't made any moves after rescuing Han Yunqi from the brothel. He couldn't be plotting something, right? When Emperor Tianhui's verbal decree reached the Duke of Qin's estate, Long Fei had no choice but to leave early to heal his wounds. He was about to leave when Chu Shifeng timidly added, "Your Highness, His Majesty summoned esteemed Wang Fei as well." Long Fei stopped abruptly, leaving Zhao Mama and Bailey Mingxiang to grow anxious. They didn't know about His Highness Duke of Qin's injuries, nor did they know esteemed Wang Fei's condition. Chapter 498. Although Chu Shifeng had some complaints about esteemed Wang Fei, he was very clear that His Highness couldn't let go of that woman. Of course, he hoped that the two of them would patch things up soon. Otherwise, His Highness's icy face would leave his subordinates trembling in fear. After all, when esteemed Wang Fei was in the estate, everyone was much more relaxed. No matter how angry His Highness was, esteemed Wang Fei only needed to say a few good words to smooth things over. But now even Chu Shifeng had to tread carefully, much less everyone else. Using Emperor Tianhui's summons as an excuse, he could go fetch esteemed Wang Fei back. Even if he said it was His Highness who sent him, esteemed Wang Fei should yield, right? Seeing His Highness Duke of Qin remain silent, Chu Shifeng probed, "Your Highness, should this subordinate go?" At this moment, Bailey Mingxiang suddenly spoke up. "Your Highness, why don't you enter the palace from the north gates? You can pick up esteemed Wang Fei on the way." The Duke of Qin's estate was closer to the south gates, while the Han estate was closer to the north. If he brought Han Yunqi to the Duke of Qin's estate, he'd have to go through the south gates. If Long Fei went to find Han Yunqi, then he'd have to go through the north gates. Actually, the journey was the same. The key lay in whether Han Yunqi came or Long Fei went. Bailey Mingxiang was a woman, so she understood women better than Chu Shifeng. She was also more meticulous. She mused that with esteemed Wang Fei's temper, esteemed Wang Fei might not return with Chu Shifeng if His Highness didn't pick her up personally. Unless a woman's heart had given up, she'd always wait for her husband to pick her up. But if His Highness Duke of Qin went personally, everything would be different. What conflict couldn't be resolved if he went personally? Chu Shifeng and Zhao Mama both understood what Bailey Mingxiang meant by her suggestion. Chu Shifeng snorted disdainfully, thinking that His Highness Duke of Qin wouldn't agree. But instead, His Highness Duke of Qin simply said, "You can come with me." Her? Come with him? Bailey Mingxiang's heart gave a lurch as she felt overwhelmed by the favor. If Zhao Mama hadn't shoved her aside, she wouldn't have reacted. His Highness wanted her to follow. Before she could even catch up, her heart was already pounding nonstop. When His Highness Duke of Qin had already walked far away, Bailey Mingxiang hurriedly chased after him under Zhao Mama's urging. She didn't dare to get too close and kept a distance of 3 steps from him. After boarding the carriage, Bailey Mingxiang consciously sat next to the coachman. His heart was filled with anxiety all the way to the Han residence. As soon as the carriage stopped, a cold voice came from inside. "Go and call him out." Yes. Bailey Mingxiang naturally knew that His Highness had asked her to come along to persuade the Princess Consort. She hesitated for a moment, but still mustered up her courage and whispered, "Your Highness, we're already at the door. Why don't we?" Unfortunately, before he could finish his sentence, Long Fei reprimanded him coldly. "What nonsense are you spouting? Why aren't you going?" Bailey Mingxiang's heart almost jumped out of her mouth. She turned to leave. No, she ran. At this moment, Han Yunqi was changing the dressing on her own wound. Last night, she'd heard from Su Donglin that the Duke of Qin's estate hadn't made any moves, so she felt at ease. She mused that Long Fei hadn't made a move despite such a big incident in the capital. Most likely, he was still sitting on top of the mountain to watch the tigers fight. As long as he didn't get involved, she didn't have anything to worry about. In any case, she hated these senseless fights in Tianning's imperial harem. Han Yunqi reacted calmly to Bailey Mingxiang's arrival. She only assumed that Bailey Mingxiang had come to persuade her to return. You came just in time. I'm lacking a helper here, Han Yunqi said mildly. Bailey Mingxiang saw the mangled flesh on her shoulder and felt distressed. He quickly took over the gauze and helped her treat it. Esteemed Wang Fei, why didn't you find little Chen Xiang for help? Forget about little Chen Xiang. Han Yunqi didn't even want to see Lady Helian. That group of people had urged her to return as soon as they arrived. She treated her maternal home as a safe haven, but that group of people couldn't wait for her to leave. Han Yunqi didn't speak, but lazily sprawled on the bed, enjoying Bailey Mingxiang's service. Bailey Mingxiang coaxed her as he bandaged her wound. Esteemed Wang Fei, why don't you return? Han Yunqi pretended not to hear, but Bailey Mingxiang said again, Esteemed Wang Fei, His Highness sent this servant to pick you up? That wasn't the end of the sentence. His Highness sent this servant to pick you up, and His Highness sent this servant to pick you up in a carriage to enter the palace had completely different meanings. Still, no matter what the meaning was, Han Yunqi's gloomy face relaxed quite a bit. Still, she didn't say a word. Bailey Mingxiang wasn't in a rush to coax her, but carefully finished bandaging the wound. Actually, esteemed Wang Fei's wound was very deep. Moreover, it hadn't been stitched up, so it took a lot of effort to bandage it up. After a long while, Bailey Mingxiang finished. Afraid that His Highness would grow impatient waiting outside, she quickly asked, Esteemed Wang Fei, shall this servant help you tidy up? No need. Han Yunqi refused. Esteemed Wang Fei, husband and wife quarrel at the head of the bed, but reconcile at the foot of the bed. His Highness has already yielded, so why don't you come back with this servant? Bailey Mingxiang persuaded earnestly. Han Yunqi mused to herself, does this count as yielding? Does he believe in my innocence? Chu Shifeng's first complaint was enough for that guy to show up in the middle of the night. Couldn't he come himself now? Would she go back just because he sent someone to pick her up? And after that, would he still not believe her? Or wouldn't he explain where he and Duamu Yao had gone? Would he keep arguing with her? Or would he just forget about everything and pretend nothing ever happened? Since she'd already returned to the Han estate, there was no reason for her to go back without a clear explanation. Esteemed Wang Fei, then what will it take for you to come back with this servant? Bailey Mingxiang coaxed again. Han Yunqi replied offhandedly, unless he comes in person. Hadn't Bailey Mingxiang been waiting for these exact words? Thrilled, she grabbed Han Yunqi's hand and said, Esteemed Wang Fei, quick, come with this servant. What for? Han Yunqi didn't understand. Bailey Mingxiang didn't explain, but pulled her outside until they reached the Han estate gates. Han Yunqi halted her steps at the sight of the luxurious carriage parked outside. This was the Duke of Qin's highest-grade carriage. Who else would dare to use it except for Long Fei Yi? Did he really come in person? Seeing esteemed Wang Fei's surprise and delight, Bailey Mingxiang's heart finally settled down. In a low voice, she said, Esteemed Wang Fei, you have to keep your word. His Majesty summoned you and His Highness to the palace. Once you leave, you'll have to go back with His Highness. She didn't say that His Highness Duke of Qin was here to pick up esteemed Wang Fei, but set up a trap for esteemed Wang Fei to jump into. She wanted esteemed Wang Fei to think that His Highness's true purpose was to pick her up and that going to the palace was just a side trip. She had to admit that Bailey Mingxiang was very smart. But what kind of person was Han Yunqi? How could she not see through such little tricks? As soon as she heard the words go to the palace, she guessed what was going on. As it turned out, Emperor Tianhui had summoned her and Long Fei. Long Fei must have come to pick her up along the way, but for some strange reason, she didn't expose them. Instead, she agreed with Bailey Mingxiang. Bailey Mingxiang rejoiced. She knew that esteemed Wang Fei had a stubborn temper, but her heart was still soft before His Highness Duke of Qin. Now all she had to do was wait for His Highness and esteemed Wang Fei to leave the palace before fanning the flames a little. Then she'd have His Highness yield a little and succeed. Master and servant were about to head for the carriage when Long Fei Ye's sharp voice came from inside. Are we going or not? This wasn't his first time here. The first time was when he came to deliver the medical pouch. He'd already yielded twice, so what else did this woman want? He'd been waiting in the carriage for almost an hour. He almost thought that she wouldn't come out. Han Yunqi stopped in her tracks. She didn't want to ask any more questions, but her heart grew cold. This was his attitude when he came to pick her up in person. So impatient. If he waited so long, wouldn't he come in and take a look? If Emperor Tianhui hadn't summoned him, would he have come at all? Your Highness, just then esteemed Wang Fei was. Bailey Mingxiang wanted to explain, but Han Yunqi only glared at him coldly. He only came to find me to enter the palace with him, right? Bailey Mingxiang was put in a difficult spot, but still forced himself to lie. Esteemed Wang Fei, we'll return to the estate once we leave the palace. It's not like you don't know His Highness's temper. His Highness didn't sleep at all while you were gone. Just look at his face later. It won't look good. Han Yunqi's face was gloomy as she curtsied. Qinxie greets your Highness. I've made you wait. It's good that you know. Hurry up and get in. Long Fei Ye's tone was filled with impatience. If Emperor Tianhui hadn't summoned her, Han Yunqi would probably flick her sleeves and leave already. Yes, she suppressed her anger as she got into the carriage. If this was the past, he'd always give her a hand whenever she got in or out of the carriage. But now, he sat unmoving in the carriage. Han Yunqi had already entered, but he didn't even spare her a glance. Han Yunqi maintained a respectful attitude as she sat in the seat furthest away from him with her head bowed. She hadn't even been this distant when she was 100 paces away from him in the past. As the carriage moved forward, the driver hurried along, but Bailey Mingxiang only said in a low voice, "Let's slow down a bit. There's no rush in the palace." There was still some distance between the Han estate and the palace. At least let master and mistress spend more time together. Bailey Mingxiang wasn't sure if she'd overreached herself this time, but her lips quirked up into a self-mocking smile. Inside the carriage, the silence was stifling enough to make it hard to breathe. The air between Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi seemed to grow heavy and heavy. Unconsciously, Han Yunqi looked up and saw that Long Fei Ye's complexion really wasn't looking too good. After all, she'd taken Bailey Mingxiang's lies to heart. Just what did this guy do with Duamu Yao? Did something happen in Tianshan Kinzo? How did he get by these past few days? Did he really not sleep? Seeing that Long Fei Yi was about to look up, Han Yunqi immediately lowered her head again. Long Fei Yi did indeed raise his head and look over. His eyes were as cold as ice, but they were still focused on her shoulders. The clothes on her shoulders were smooth and clean, with no signs of bandages. Compared to Han Yunqi, his gaze was more wanton. He quickly studied her quiet little face again, as if inspecting a precious treasure he'd lent out to see if it was still in good condition. Still, he didn't say a word. Like this, the two of them walked in silence until they reached the palace gates. It was time to get off the carriage. Chapter 499. The carriage slowly came to a stop. It was time to get off, but Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi didn't move. One had his head bowed, making it impossible to see his expression, while the other was expressionless as she stared out the window. In the end, it was Han Yunqi who emerged first. She was about to jump off the carriage when Bailey Mingxiang hastily stopped her. Esteemed Wang Fei, Mingxiang will help you. Han Yunqi didn't speak, but jumped off the carriage to avoid him. She wasn't some delicate flower, much less a sickly invalid. Why would she need someone to help her off the carriage? The driver was helpless at the sight. In the past, esteemed Wang Fei had always been helped on and off the carriage by His Highness. By now, Long Fei Yi had recovered his wits and silently got off the carriage. He glanced at Han Yunqi before walking towards the imperial study. Naturally, Han Yunqi followed him. Bailey Mingxiang didn't follow, but stood guard by the carriage with the driver. Han Yunqi was clearly distracted, so she didn't notice that Bailey Mingxiang wasn't following them. As she walked, she found it hard to keep up with Long Fei Yi. His legs were so long that she could take 2 steps with him. Only now did she realize that he'd purposely slowed down when he held her hand in the past. Thinking up to here, she didn't chase after him, but walked at her usual pace. But Long Fei Yi didn't slow down at all, but picked up his pace instead. As a result, the distance between the two of them grew wider and wider. As she watched Long Fei walk further and further away, Han Yunqi's expression grew uglier and uglier. She almost turned to leave. With his attitude, he probably wouldn't even notice if she suddenly disappeared. Damned Emperor Tianhui. It was enough to summon Long Fei, but why did he summon her as well? Sulking, Han Yunqi cursed Emperor Tianhui countless times in her heart. By the time she reached the door to the imperial study, Long Fei had already been waiting for her with a taut face. She still walked the remaining few steps quickly. However, as soon as she reached his side, he went straight into the house and left her with his back facing her. Long Fei. Han Yunqi was so angry that she glared at him. Unfortunately, it was useless. He didn't have eyes on his back and couldn't see. She walked in with large strides, looking like she was telling strangers not to come near and acquaintances not to disturb her. Her expression was really twice as ugly as Long Fei's. Emperor Tianhui disliked Long Fei's cold face to begin with. Now that he saw Han Yunqi's expression, he assumed that this couple wasn't giving him any face and immediately grew gloomy. This assassination attempt had nothing to do with him. What was the attitude of these two people? Come and have a seat. Yunqi, did you get a fright this time? Emperor Tianhui asked with concern as he walked towards the tea table. He hadn't summoned the Duke of Qin and his wife to question them, but simply wanted to chat. No, Han Yunqi answered straightforwardly. Could she say that she was really frightened? Could she say that without Gu, she would have been shot to death by the arrows long ago? Could she really be frightened by the sight of Gu Qixiao's battered back and bruised body? She wasn't here to complain and make Emperor Tianhui laugh at her. If Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu hadn't escalated the situation to the point of endangering the capital, Emperor Tianhui might even be thanking those crossbow archers. Did you get hurt? Emperor Tianhui asked next. No. Han Yunqi replied mildly. Emperor Tianhui was about to ask some more questions, but Han Yunqi's curt reply made him unable to continue. After sitting down, he made a gesture, and Long Fei sat down across from him. There were only 2 seats at the table in the imperial study, so Han Yunqi had nowhere to sit. Emperor Tianhui should have given her a seat, but he didn't say a word. Instead, he slowly steeped some tea. Long Fei didn't speak either, but Han Yunqi stood behind him like a servant girl. Her head and eyes were bowed, but her back was still ramrod straight. Emperor Tianhui was about to pour some tea for Long Fei when Long Fei stopped him. I don't dare. Chindi will do it. His movements were 100 times more elegant than Emperor Tianhui's. Imperial brother didn't make a special trip to find Chindi for tea, did you? He started the conversation without paying any attention to Han Yunqi standing on one side. Emperor Tianhui glanced at Han Yunqi in astonishment. Could it be that the Duke of Qin had grown tired of this woman? Didn't he dote on her before? Is he just going to let her stand here and ignore her? Hee, Jin really did make a special trip to find you for tea. Ever since the black market gunpowder explosion, Zhan's ears haven't had a moment of peace. Emperor Tianhui sighed with emotion. Imperial brother has worked hard for the country. It's been hard on you. Long Fei said half-heartedly. Emperor Tianhui sighed and asked, have you found any clues about those crossbow archers? You'll have to ask the Imperial guards to find out. Chindi is waiting for news too. Long Fei pushed the blame away. Emperor Tianhui suddenly lost his temper. Those useless Imperial guards, they can't even find the culprit when they're trying to catch a turtle in a jar. Zhen will give Mu Qingwu 3 days. If he doesn't find the culprit by then, Zhan will cripple him. Long Fei remained silent for a while before he said, you can't blame the young general. Chindi personally searched for an entire day without finding the culprit. Emperor Tianhui was astonished by his words. Aside from the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet, the Duke of Qin had never shown favoritism to any faction despite his overwhelming power. But today he was speaking up for Mu Qingwu. He'd clearly stayed in the Duke of Qin's estate without making any moves over the past few days. So where did the search come from? Moreover, Mu Qingwu's subordinates had turned traitor and almost took Han Yunqi's life. Didn't that guy bear a grudge? Don't blame him. There's actually a traitor in the Imperial Guards. How serious is that? How can Jin not blame him? Emperor Tianhui slapped the table angrily. Long Fei didn't feel any pain or itch. He has so many soldiers in his hands, so it's impossible to cover every single one of them. It's inevitable. If Imperial Brother wants to deal with him, he'll have to wait until this matter is over. Now's the time to use people. Emperor Tianhui's eyes flickered with complicated emotions. The Duke of Qin seemed to be aloof and neutral on the surface, but his words were clearly protecting Mu Qingwu. Was there some secret between the Duke of Qin's estate and General Mu's estate? Emperor Tianhui drank a few cups of tea before he spoke again. You know what happened at the military depot last night, right? How could gunpowder be so easy to get? As Chindi sees it, this incident and that incident at the black market aren't much different. Emperor Tianhui was more concerned about that than anything else. What do you mean? He asked anxiously. Only the armies of the two nations have access to gunpowder. General Mu wouldn't be stupid enough to light it up in front of his own house, right? Long Fei laughed lightly. His words were obviously suspecting the Chu clan. Emperor Tianhui laughed coldly. What if he was hiding it for himself and accidentally detonated it? Long Fei gave him a meaningful look, but stopped favoring the Mu clan. That's hard to say. Chundi was only guessing on the spur of the moment. As for the truth, it's still up to Imperial Brother to decide. But his previous words had already planted the seeds of doubt in Emperor Tianhui's heart. General Mu's estate held one of Tianning's 3 largest military forces and commanded 100,000 Imperial Guards. It was only natural that they were loyal to Tianning, but who they were loyal to had always been a variable. This was especially true after His Highness Duke of Qin's forces grew strong enough to contend against Emperor Tianhui's. He seemed to be neutral on the surface, but was actually the most worrisome of all. It wasn't until Emperor Tianhui reactivated the Crown Prince and united father and son against the Duke of Qin's estate that General Mu's stance became clear. In front of the Duke of Qin, Emperor Tianhui wouldn't be on guard against his own son for now. He'd also included General Mu's estate in his own sphere of influence. But now the Imperial Guards had changed sides. The Crown Prince was insinuating insinuations and squeezing out noble Consort Chu. The military depot had exploded, and the Duke of Qin's attitude today. How could the paranoid Emperor Tianhui set his heart at ease? What Long Fei wanted was for Emperor Tianhui to grow suspicious of the Mu clan and the Crown Prince. After being reactivated, the Crown Prince had long harbored thoughts of rebelling and usurping the throne. But he'd always lacked the right opportunity to do so. Now was a good chance. Of course, the Crown Prince was still too young and inexperienced to accomplish anything on his own. But things would be different if the Mu clan had thoughts of rebellion as well. As long as the Mu clan could harden their hearts to help the Crown Prince, the Chu clan wouldn't be able to reap any benefits no matter what they did. Long Fei hadn't made a move this entire time, but he was still keeping track of the situation. At this point, Emperor Tianhui didn't ask any more questions, but started chatting about other irrelevant topics. Long Fei kept to himself as he replied, even nodding his head several times without saying a word. As they chatted and drank tea, 2 hours passed by. Han Yunxi's legs were sore from all the standing. She couldn't help but glance at Long Fei multiple times. But Long Fei seemed to have forgotten about her existence and completely ignored her. Of course, Emperor Tianhui remembered her existence. He gave her a meaningful look before having Eunuch Luo set up the chessboard. Duke of Qin, you haven't exchanged pointers with Jian in a long time. If you don't lose today, I won't let you go. Who would dare to win a game of chess against the Emperor? But Long Fei dared. He'd played chess countless times since he was young and had never lost a single match. Long Fei didn't speak, but the white and black chess pieces soon began to play against each other. Long Fei's stance showed that he wasn't planning to lose. If he wasn't planning to lose, did that mean he wasn't planning to leave? Han Yunxi kept her eyes lowered as she stared at the chessboard. She was alone in a world of silence. This game of chess went on for a full 4 hours. By the time night fell, there was still no winner. Including the previous 2 hours, Han Yunxi had been standing for a total of 6 hours. Her calves had even gone numb. In the end, an urgent report arrived, prompting Emperor Tianhui to stop the game. Looks like Zhen has no choice but to let you go today. Chundi should take his leave as well. Long Feiyi lazily rose to his feet. He walked easily, but Han Yunqi's legs almost gave way as soon as she took a step. Still, she steadied herself. Her calves grew numb with each step, but she kept her back straight and her head held high as she followed him out. Emperor Tianhui stared at their departing figures, filled with doubts. He was trying to figure out what had happened between Long Feiyi and Han Yunqi, but the current situation in the capital made him too preoccupied to think about it. Just like before, Long Feiyi was walking in front while Han Yunqi followed behind. But she was no longer looking at his back, but staring at the road with her head bowed. She didn't know how long she'd been walking, but she only lifted her head when she reached the palace gates. Actually, she didn't like looking at his back because it gave her a sense of unfamiliarity. But this time, she didn't even have time to look at Long Feiyi's back, because Long Feiyi had already boarded his carriage. Chapter 500. Seeing esteemed Wang Fei walk out alone, Bailey Mingxiang hurriedly ran over to receive her. Esteemed Wang Fei, get in the carriage. His Highness is waiting. Where are we going? Han Yunqi asked indifferently. Back to the palace with His Highness. Esteemed Wang Fei, you said that as long as His Highness personally came, you would return to the palace. Quickly get in the carriage. His Highness is waiting. Although Bailey Mingxiang was comforting her with a smile, her heart was very uncomfortable. She never thought that His Highness would come out first and even get into the carriage. Did something happen between the two of them in the palace? Why was esteemed Wang Fei so disappointed? Han Yunqi didn't say anything as she seriously looked at Bailey Mingxiang. Bailey Mingxiang was still resisting at first, but soon he couldn't take it anymore and avoided her gaze. Go tell. He doesn't need to wait for me. Saying this, she prepared to leave, but Bailey Mingxiang hurriedly pulled her back. Get in the carriage. It's not like you don't know His Highness' temper. If you yield one step, His Highness will definitely yield 10 steps. Han Yunqi insisted on leaving, but Bailey Mingxiang wouldn't let her go. He earnestly tried to persuade her. Esteemed Wang Fei, if His Highness didn't have you in his heart, he would have left long ago, right? He's still waiting in the carriage. You should think about it carefully. Han Yunqi looked at Bailey Mingxiang, and her eyes suddenly turned red. All the grievances she had felt in the imperial study came flooding back. Mingxiang, my leg hurts. Leg? What's wrong with esteemed Wang Fei's leg? Bailey Mingxiang was anxious. He was about to crouch down to inspect her leg when His Highness Duke of Qin's impatient voice came from the carriage. Han Yunqi, why aren't you leaving yet? His tone was so fierce. He had never been this fierce since she'd met him. Ever since he accompanied her to pay respects to Empress Dowager Li, he would often rush her. No matter how anxious and impatient he was, he would always stop 3 to 5 steps away from her and turn to look at her. Coldly, he asked, Han Yunqi, aren't you leaving yet? He had never abandoned her, nor had he ever gotten angry. But this time, he had left her on the road. He was so fierce. Han Yunqi strode to the window and asked coldly, Your Highness, please wait for a moment. I have something to ask Your Highness. I'll leave after that. In truth, the entire journey from the Han estate to the palace gates had left her feeling incredibly stifled. She really wanted to ask about Duamu Yao, explain about Gu, and quarrel with Long Feiyi. However, after being mercilessly forgotten in the imperial study, she suddenly felt powerless. She suddenly did not want to say anything. If one had to work very hard to be liked by someone, then what was the point of being liked? Right now, she only wanted to clarify that question and then leave. Speak, he said coldly. The antidote that Gu gave, was it really only 80% full? Han Yunqi asked very seriously. As soon as she said this, the carriage fell silent. He said that the antidote he gave was indeed a full bottle, Han Yunqi added. However, the carriage remained silent. Han Yunqi waited patiently and did not rush him. After an indeterminate amount of time, Long Feiyi finally spoke. So you believe him? Han Yunqi avoided answering. I'm just asking Your Highness. You believe him and suspect this prince? Long Feiyi asked again. Han Yunshi only heard his cold voice, but did not know that he had been absent-minded in the carriage for a long time. She did not know how much hatred this man had endured, how much effort he had put in, how many plans he had messed up, and how many sleepless nights he had endured, from the moment he had decided to hide that matter until the moment Mute Granny hanged herself. From the moment they entered the palace until now, he had deliberately ignored her in order to provoke her into speaking up, to provoke her into rushing in front of him to argue with him. But who would have thought that this woman would ask such a question the moment she opened her mouth? It's Gu again. It's Gu again. As it turned out, she had unconditionally trusted him in Medicine Ghost Valley only because he was the Gu Chi Sha she loathed. Now that it was Gu, she immediately began to question her trust. This time, Han Yunshi fell silent. Han Yunshi, answer this prince's question. Long Fei Yi said angrily. Gu brought me to find Mute Granny, so if he's really Gu Chi Sha, then he definitely wouldn't have hidden the antidote for himself, Han Yunshi replied objectively. She was not an idiot. Back then, she had indeed been prejudiced against Gu Chi Sha, which was why she had blindly believed that Gu Chi Sha had tricked them. But now that she was facing Gu Chi Sha, she was not biased. She was only thinking rationally. Even though she did not say it outright, everyone understood what she was implying. Whoever had hidden the antidote for the broomcorn millet poison would have Mute Granny in their hands. By hiding Mute Granny, they were undoubtedly hiding the mystery of her origins. You think that Mute Granny is in this prince's hands? He did not know what Long Fei Ye's expression was like in the carriage, but he actually went straight to the point. Gu wouldn't have hidden it for himself? Then why did he put in the ineffective powder? Why did the ineffective powder so coincidentally turn the porcelain bottle black? Long Fei Yi asked again. Gu was not only pill fiend, he was also the black-robed man who had barged into the hidden pavilion. He had done all of this to arouse Han Yunshi's suspicions. He would definitely not let this matter rest. He, Long Fei Yi, had never needed to lie to any woman. But since he had already told this woman, he would definitely not admit to it. Even if he died, he would not admit it. In the face of Long Fei Ye's questioning, Han Yunshi recalled what Gu had said that night. She was in a mess. In the end, she said indifferently, Your Highness, just pretend that I didn't ask. With that, she powerlessly turned and left. However, Long Fei Yi alighted from the carriage and shouted angrily, Han Yunshi, stop right there. Han Yunshi really did stop in her tracks. Does Your Highness have any other orders? You still haven't answered this prince's question. Do you think that Mute Granny is in this prince's hands? Long Fei Ye's dark eyes were filled with stubbornness. However, Han Yunshi remained silent. Long Fei Yi grabbed her hand fiercely. Answer me. However, Han Yunshi ultimately lowered her head. This man's contemptuous smile in the brothel had pierced her heart. She was no longer the foolish woman who would stare at him foolishly. Before she could clearly distinguish right from wrong, she wouldn't believe Gu. She wouldn't believe him. She wouldn't believe anyone. Finally, Long Fei Yi released her hand and coldly ordered, Someone, send her back to the Han estate. Han Yunshi's heart skipped a beat, but a self-deprecating smile appeared on her face. She had guessed correctly. Bailey Mingxiang had been lying to her all this time. Fine, I'll go back. Long Fei Yi, if I go back, I'll never come back. Bailey Mingxiang was scared out of her wits. She didn't dare to persuade His Highness Duke of Qin and could only chase after esteemed Wang Fei. Unfortunately, by the time she chased after him, the coachman had already left and Long Fei Yi had already disappeared. Looking at the empty space behind her, Bailey Mingxiang suddenly didn't know how to persuade him. At this moment, any words would be useless. His Highness Duke of Qin really had left. Han Yunshi didn't take the carriage, but endured the pain in her legs to walk back to the Han estate. Bailey Mingxiang followed her all the way until she settled down at the Han estate. As soon as Long Fei Yi returned to the Duke of Qin's estate, he ordered Chu Shifeng to do something. Stop all of Pill Fiend Pharmacy's construction. He ordered cold. Chu Shifeng could clearly sense His Highness Duke of Qin's rage, but he still asked timidly, What about South Ning Prefecture? Stop everything. Long Fei Yi raged. Chu Shifeng had no choice but to do as he was told. His Highness had just told him to secretly build a large pharmacy in South Ning Prefecture that was twice as big as the one in the capital. Moreover, His Highness and Medicine City's Wangong had designed the blueprints together. It looks like it's not just a simple argument this time. Chu Shifeng could only do as he was told. As soon as he left, Tang Li showed up. Tang Li was about to fall ill from boredom at the hidden pavilion. Now that he was spared, he was as happy as a bird released from its cage. Big bro, when you're better, we brothers can work together and kill off that goo guy. I refuse to believe he's so lucky. Go to Celestial Mountain for me, Long Fei said. Tang Li's expression changed. What for? He had run away from the wedding and caused the Tang clan to offend the bride's faction. His father had kept the bride's side in check while having Aunt Ru lead a group of people to search for him. Meanwhile, he was hiding in the most dangerous and safest hidden pavilion. Every month, he would release a fake trail to lure the old folks into running in circles. This month, Aunt Ru and the rest would probably go to Celestial Mountain as well. If he went there now, he'd be seeking death. Go see my master for me. Long Fei Ye's sorrowful tone made Tang Li feel heavy as well. He sighed softly and said, "All right, I'll go." Afterwards, Long Fei Ye met with General Bailey again. The two of them had a secret conversation behind closed doors, but it was impossible to know what they discussed. As soon as General Bailey returned to the Bailey estate, he transferred a few mermaid soldiers to hide in the Han estate's lake and wait for orders. Meanwhile, Long Fei Yi returned to his quarters to continue treating his wounds. His seclusion lasted for 10 days and 10 nights. Within those 10 days, the capital city fell into chaos. Then all of Tianning fell into chaos. 3 days later, General Mu discovered that the gunpowder had exploded inside the military depot, not outside the walls. When Emperor Tianhui found out, he flew into a rage and questioned the Mu family about their secret stash of gunpowder. General Mu denied it, saying that the location of the explosion wasn't enough evidence. As for the truth, whether one of his subordinates had stashed the gunpowder away, or someone had planted the evidence to frame them still needed to be investigated. Without any evidence, Emperor Tianhui had no right to condemn the Mu family. Still, he reduced General Mu's military authority in front of all the civil and military officials and gave the 1st Artillery Corps to the Minister of War, Lord Wu, to take charge of. Naturally, he gave the gunpowder storehouse to the Ministry of War as well. At the same time, because the Imperial Guard still hadn't found the whereabouts of the crossbowmen, Emperor Tianhui removed Mu Qingwu from his position as Great General of the Imperial Guards and replaced him with Deputy General Meng Zhan. It had to be said that the Mu family had taken a huge tumble this time. The Imperial Guards and the 1st Artillery Corps were all elite soldiers who were directly responsible for the safety of the capital city. How could anyone not feel heartache when they were gone? The Mu family's hearts were dripping blood, but Crown Prince Long Tianma felt even worse. As soon as court was over, the Crown Prince lost his cool and rushed straight to the Mu family to interrogate Mu Qingwu. Just what's the deal with that commander of the Imperial Guards? Speak. Mu Qingwu's face was filled with resentment, but he didn't speak. Long Tianma glared at General Mu. Great General, speak. General Mu's expression was grave as he fell silent. If you don't speak, how can this Crown Prince help you? Imperial Father is only taking the first step. Don't you know that noble consort Chu's already been favored? If you keep pillow talk, you'll have no choice but to admit to your secret stash of gunpowder. Long Tianmo raged. Finally, Mu Qingwu couldn't take it anymore. Father, His Highness Crown Prince has the right to know. Chapter 501. For Mu Qingwu to say something like this, there was no doubt that this father and son pair knew about the betrayal of the Imperial Army. Even though he didn't know the truth, Long Tianma was even angrier. He slammed his fist on the table. You. Good. Very good. He and Mu Qingwu had done so much and had gained his father's trust in the beginning. However, after his father summoned the Mu family to ask about the betrayal of the Imperial Army, everything began to change. If it wasn't for the betrayal of the Imperial Army arousing his father's suspicion, things would not have developed to this point. If it was before, based on his father's trust in the Mu family, he wouldn't have stripped them of their military power so quickly just because of the gunpowder explosion in the armory. At least his father would still consider and hesitate. They could still fight for the time his father had to consider and hesitate. But now, the entire court was laughing at the Eastern Palace. Who didn't know that the emperor suppressing the Mu family was questioning the Eastern Palace? Seeing that General Mu still didn't speak, Long Tianma's face twisted in anger. He was about to flick his sleeves and leave when General Mu suddenly spoke up. "Your Highness, please calm your anger. This general has his own difficulties." "Speak." Long Tianma forcefully suppressed his temper. But as soon as Great General Mu uttered a name, Long Tianma smashed the most precious gold-threaded cedar wood tea table in the general's estate with his fist. This name was without a doubt Mu Luiyue. Even though he was facing Mu Luiyue's father and brother, Long Tianma couldn't help but draw his sword. "This prince will kill her." Mu Qingwu quickly stopped him. Actually, when he found out who the traitor of the imperial army was, he knew what was going on. That was why he didn't hesitate to kill him. As for the two captains in the imperial prison, they only obeyed and knew nothing, so they couldn't get anything out of them. "Let go." Long Tianma's face sunk. General Mu kneeled in front of him. "Your Highness, please calm your anger. My unfilial daughter has done such a ridiculous and muddle-headed thing. This general really has no face to face you." Long Tianma snorted coldly. "You've kept it a secret until now. Do you still have any shame?" Mu Qingwu sighed deeply and knelt down as well. "Your Highness, my sister deserves to die 10,000 deaths, but she is the crown prince's wife." Upon hearing this, Long Tianma calmed down. Crown princess. How could he forget that Mu Luiyue had such a title? The crown prince consort, his woman, the mistress of the Eastern Palace. Mu Luiyue had committed a crime with such an identity, so it was destined that this matter had to be kept a secret. Otherwise, not only would the Mu family suffer, but even the Eastern Palace would suffer. Imperial father was already so suspicious. If she exposed Mu Luiyue, it would undoubtedly give Imperial father the opportunity to suppress him. "Your Highness, please don't lower yourself to Luiyue's level for the time being. When this matter is over, I will definitely teach her a lesson." "Your Highness, the best thing to do now is to quickly find those crossbowmen. Otherwise, His Majesty will definitely pursue this matter." The Mu family's father and son both earnestly advised. Mu Qingwu wholeheartedly protected the overall situation, and General Mu also had some selfish motives. He was reluctant to part with his daughter. Long Tianma fell to the side, his heart extremely uncomfortable. The thing he regretted the most in his life, but also the thing he couldn't regret the most, was marrying Mu Luiyue. Of course, when he married Mu Luiyue, it was for the Mu family. Now that things had reached this point, it was time to let the Mu family play its true role. After a long silence, Long Tianma lowered his voice. "The two of you, rather than trembling in fear and being trampled on by others, why don't you?" He didn't continue speaking, but made a motion of drawing his sword. Without a doubt, this was an attempt to rebel. Mu Qingwu was shocked, but General Mu wasn't surprised. He had long guessed that this day would come, but he didn't expect it to come so soon. Neither father nor son said a word. Long Tianma lowered his voice even further. "If we don't do it now, when will we? Once Imperial Father takes away all of your military power, it'll be too late for regrets." Unfortunately, the Mu family's father and son still remained silent. General Mu usually looked crude, impulsive, and had a bad temper, but he was still very cautious when it came to such important matters. The Mu family had been through 2 generations of Tianning's monarchs. They had been able to maintain a neutral stance in the past, when Emperor Tianhui's deep trust and control such a large military power. This was enough to prove that General Mu wasn't simple. As for Mu Qingwu, his heart wasn't so complicated. He didn't want to be loyal to anyone but Tianning and the common people. Once there was internal strife, the ones who would suffer the most would be the innocent people. Long Tianma was well aware of the Mu family's attitudes. He remained silent, but he didn't stay silent to the end. Soon enough, he left behind a few words and strode away. He said, "Fine. Count it as this crown prince's loss this time. I'll put this debt on Mu Liuyue's head. Long Tianma hadn't even left the courtyard when General Mu chased after him. Your Highness Crown Prince. Your Highness Crown Prince, please wait. Mu Qingwu followed behind him, watching his father's once tall and sturdy figure become so haggard and old. A trace of sorrow rose in his heart. He also felt that Mu Liyue deserved to die for this matter. Unfortunately, he knew that his father wouldn't just sit by and watch. Liyue looked too much like his late mother. Moreover, no matter how much parents spoiled their children, it was still within reason. After all, they were blood relatives. Many times, Mu Qingwu would rather be born in a heartless and cold-blooded imperial family. That place didn't have the shackles of kinship. As soon as General Mu chased after him, Long Tianma knew he had a chance. He couldn't marry Mu Liyue for nothing. As expected, General Mu murmured, "Your Highness Crown Prince, this soldier will remember this matter in my heart." But the current Imperial Guard, before he could finish, Long Tianma laughed coldly. Many of the Imperial Guards were promoted by your Mu family troops. Moreover, aren't the cannoneers in the Ministry of War's hands? The wisest thing Emperor Tianhui had done in his life was to seize the chance to take back the cannoneers from General Mu's estate. This was something he'd wanted to do for a long time. But the stupidest thing he'd done was to hand over the cannoneers and gunpowder stores to the Minister of War. After all, the Minister of War had long been Long Tianma's man. When Chu Qingge had received a squad of archers as her dowry, it was the Minister of War who'd suggested leaving them at the borders under the command of the Cavalry General Great General Ning. After the Minister of War's suggestion, the Crown Prince wanted to follow suit, but it was General Mu who told him to avoid suspicion. General Mu nodded helplessly, but he still couldn't make up his mind. This is a serious matter, and it's come so suddenly. I ask that your Highness give this soldier some time to think it over. Long Tianma nodded. Fine. This Crown Prince will give you time, but you should make your preparations by now. Everything had happened too suddenly. He never expected his imperial father to be so suspicious, but since his father would rather believe an outsider like Chu Qingge than him, then he shouldn't blame him for abandoning their father-son relationship. When the emperor had used his life to deal with the Duke of Qin and Qin Wangfei, he'd forgotten about his imperial father in his heart. Just like that, the Eastern Palace and General Mu's estate began to make their preparations. The heavy responsibility of hunting down the archers fell to the new commander of the Imperial Guards, Meng Zhan. This man was loyal and devoted to Emperor Tianhui, and was known to be strict with his new post. He started a new round of manhunts that left everyone on edge. Emperor Tianhui doted on Chu Qingge again. He was already prepared for this, so after a round of pillow talk from Chu Qingge, he finally gave the Imperial Guards a special order to search the residences of the various members of the Imperial clan. After all, the Imperial Guards were limited in their search of the various residences before this. Once the news spread, all of the upper-class nobles were thrown into an uproar. Meanwhile, the Duke of Qin's estate was the quietest. Wang Fei wasn't at home, while His Highness Duke of Qin was in closed-door cultivation. Su Xiaoyu had returned because Pill Fiend Pharmacy had stopped working. She spent all day with Zhao Mama, the two of them looking at each other in silence. As for the Han estate, Han Yunxi hadn't said a word for days. To outsiders, it looked like she was hiding in her rooms to sleep, but in reality, she'd locked herself up in the large space of the detox system. Back in the black market, she'd mixed perplexing butterfly illusion and beauty's tears into the poison pond before leaving them in the detox system. She was supposed to hide in there for some peace and quiet, but discovered that the three poisons seemed to be reacting with each other. Although she wasn't sure what was going on, she could sense that the perplexing butterfly illusion's corrosive properties were weakening. Of course, there were plenty of other things she could do in the detox system, such as manually organizing the massive storehouse of medicinal ingredients. In the past, she'd make herself busy whenever she was in a bad mood. She'd be very busy, but the busier she was, the better she felt. That was why she couldn't care less about her moods. But damn it, why did she keep making mistakes this time? She'd actually messed up the orderly storehouse until it was a complete mess. In the end, She had no choice but to waste her brain power to have the system tidy things up. After that, she'd start messing around again. Messing things up? If Long Fei found out one day that she was hiding in the Han estate, what would his reaction be? Today, Long Fei emerged from his closed-door cultivation, half of his injuries healed. As soon as he emerged, Chu Tianyin came with news. Your Highness, as you expected, the Chu clan has made their move. Are you done packing? Long Fei asked mildly. Everything's been packed. Just... Chu Tianyin didn't dare to continue. Without a doubt, everything under His Highness's name had been taken care of except for one woman. It wasn't clear whether Long Fei knew what he meant, but he only said coldly, you should make preparations as well. Your lordship will leave the city tonight. All right. Chu Tianyin could only pretend he hadn't said a word. That night, something big happened at the general's estate. The commander of the Imperial Guards led a group of men to personally search the estate and found dozens of crossbow archers hiding in an abandoned latrine in the rear courtyard. Of course, the archers had fled, but Meng Zhan had personally shot 2 of them. News of this sent the entire city into an uproar. Meng Zhan sent men to chase after the archers while surrounding General Mu's estate. Emperor Tianhui was furious. That very night, he issued orders to strip the Mu father and son of their authority as generals, take back all command tokens, and imprison them in the justice courts to await trial. But just as the Mu father and son were being escorted to the imperial prisons, 3 cannon blasts came from outside the city. The cannoneers had rebelled first. For a moment, the entire capital city was thrown into chaos. The Mu father and son had no choice but to join forces with the old Imperial Guards and officially raise their troops on their way to the Imperial prisons. When there was a mutiny in the capital, attacking the Imperial Palace was their first priority. Emperor Tianhui spat out a mouthful of blood in his imperial study. Fortunately, more than half of the Imperial Guards were on hand to hold back the enemy. Chu Qinggan never expected things to get so serious, while the hidden Chu Tianyin was even more surprised. Everything had gone according to plan, but Long Tianma's move had ruined all of his efforts. Everyone fled in the chaos of the night, but the Han estate had long been deserted. Where was everyone? Chapter 502. Where were the Han family members? Where was Han Yunshi? When there was a coup d'état, it was common to take advantage of the chaos to burn, kill, and plunder. Amidst the chaos, Long Tianma still had the time to send people to protect her. Qin Wangfei had been living in the Han family for a few days, and those who cared about her knew about it. Unfortunately, Long Tianma's trusted aide came empty-handed. As soon as she left, Mu Qingwu sent over his trusted aide from the Imperial Army. Unfortunately, there was also no one to be seen. In reality, the first to arrive wasn't Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu's men, but Gu. However, Gu had already turned the Han family upside down, but there was no sign of Han Yunshi. Where was she? Of course, this group of people had all gone to the Duke of Qin's residence. Only then did they find out that the Duke of Qin's residence was also empty. Such a coincidence must have been the Duke of Qin's doing. Long Tianma and Mu Qingwu received this news just as they were about to attack the palace gates. Mu Qingwu didn't say anything, but Long Tianma sighed softly. All of this, in the end, it couldn't escape Imperial Uncle Qin's control. The Duke of Qin was able to leave the city early and evacuate so cleanly, leaving both residences empty. Without a doubt, he had long predicted that Long Tianma would raise an army to rebel and had long made preparations. Long Tianma finally understood why Imperial Father had made such a big move this time and put the Mu family to death. Imperial Uncle Qin must have played a part in this. He knew that in this game, he had also become Imperial Uncle Qin's chess piece, but he didn't care. Without Imperial Uncle Qin adding fuel to the fire, how could General Mu have been forced to jump over the wall? Everyone felt that this coup d'état was sudden, but he felt that it was too slow and too late. Resentment had been brewing in his heart for a long time. While they were attacking the palace gates, the sound of cannons came from the other side. Without a doubt, the city gates had been breached. Once the cannons arrived, they were invincible. Who could stop them? As the cannons rumbled, the morale of the Crown Prince's army was greatly boosted. The huge wooden stakes slammed into the thick and heavy palace gates with loud bangs. It looked like the gates were about to be smashed open. Inside the palace, Emperor Tianhui was sitting in his imperial study, but the various concubines and servants had long packed up their valuables and fled. Of course, there were plenty of loyal servants who stood guard outside the study, swearing to follow Emperor Tianhui to their deaths. Currently, a few important officials and the commander of the Imperial Guard, Meng Zhan, were all in the Imperial study, urging Emperor Tianhui to retreat. Emperor Tianhui's face was ashen white as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He'd been plagued with illness for the past 6 months, but tonight's blow had aged him overnight. A man in his 40s looked even older than a man in his 50s or 60s. Hearing the chaos outside, the hands hidden in his sleeves trembled uncontrollably. Perhaps it was anger, or perhaps it was fear. "Your Majesty, the palace gates are about to be breached. Let's go." "Your Majesty, it'll be too late if we don't retreat now. The Crown Prince and the Mu family have committed treason and heresy. They have sent troops without justification and will definitely lose the support of the people. This humble subject boldly suggests that Your Majesty move the capital to Xijing and mobilize the elite troops from the central and western regions to surround the rebel army. Tonight, we've only lost a single city." Hearing Meng Zhan's words, Emperor Tianhui recovered from his shock. Meng Zhan was right. Tonight, they'd only lost the capital. If they didn't leave now, they'd lose all of Tianning. The Crown Prince had gained the upper hand in the capital only because he had the 1st Artillery Corps. But Tianning had more than one artillery corps. The capital, northwest, and central regions each had their own 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Artillery Corps. Although the Mu family had been in charge of the foot soldiers for years, not all of them were trusted subordinates of the Mu family. After the mutiny, the various generals stationed in the various regions would naturally choose a better tree to live in. Not all of them were under the Mu family's control. In the end, Emperor Tianhui was still able to stabilize the situation. He immediately ordered a retreat, but the palace had already been breached. Both the east and west gates had been blocked off, leaving only the north and south escape routes. In the midst of the chaos, Chu Qingge gave Emperor Tianhui an idea. Emperor Tianhui immediately decided to disguise himself as a eunuch and had Meng Zhan and the rest disguise themselves as his bodyguards. They mixed into the fleeing servants and escaped through the north gate. Meanwhile, all of the servants and family members were to escape through the south gate to lure away the rebel army. Just as Emperor Tianhui was about to leave, Chu Qingge stepped forward. "Your Majesty, Chunxia may be so bold as to make a presumptuous request." Faced with imminent disaster, Emperor Tianhui was in no mood to be good-tempered. "What is it?" he asked coldly. "Chunxia wants to disguise as you and head for the south gate. First, I'll lure away the Crown Prince and the rest. Second, I'll wait for a chance to kill them all," Chu Qingge said seriously. At her words, everyone remembered that this noble consort knew martial arts as well. Moreover, her archery skills were top-notch. Finding a eunuch to pretend to be Emperor Tianhui to lure away the rebel army might not buy them much time. If Chu Qingge was the one doing the job, she might even have a chance to turn the tables. Once the Crown Prince died, the dragons would be leaderless and the situation would be completely different. Emperor Tianhui was thrilled. "All right, as long as you kill that unfilial son for Zhen, you'll be Tianning's empress." Empress? Chu Qingge's heart filled with bitterness. She wanted nothing more than for Emperor Tianhui to die in the chaos, but she had no choice but to protect him. If for no other reason than the fact that she wasn't pregnant with Tianhui's child yet. "As long as Your Majesty is safe and sound, Chunxia will be perfectly satisfied," Chu Qingge said against her will. Emperor Tianhui was deeply moved. He gripped Chu Qingge's hand tightly and said, Zhen will wait for you at the Sevenly Bridge outside the city." Chu Qingge nodded and slipped his hand out of her grasp. Then she turned and left. The flames of war in the capital city burned for days and nights. Rumors said that on the night of the rebellion, The crown prince hadn't even caught up to Emperor Tianhui before he was ambushed by a high-level expert. Fortunately, a group of black-robed guards helped him survive. Another rumor said that General Mu had caught up to Emperor Tianhui himself and killed him at the South Gate. Another rumor said that Emperor Tianhui hadn't died, but had long escaped from the North Gate. Instead, it was General Mu who'd been killed by Meng Zhan in the chaos. The flames of war burned for 5 days and 5 nights. As the capital city grew calm, many of the preposterous rumors were dispelled. Actually, Emperor Tianhui had successfully escaped from the capital while Chu Qingge had run into General Mu. Both of them had been injured in their duel. While Emperor Tianhui was still on his way to Westjing, the crown prince had declared himself emperor in the capital city. On one hand, he continued to chase after Emperor Tianhui, while on the other, he actively recruited powerful officials and local powers. While the capital was in chaos, Tianning's various powers began to express their views. Some denounced the crown prince, some pledged their support to Emperor Tianhui, while others supported the crown prince and defected to Tianhui's side. Still, it was impossible to ignore the fact that the powers of the central regions in Jiangnan, whether it was the military or the large counties and prefectures, all pushed His Highness Duke of Qin forward and supported him as emperor. Hearing the news, Emperor Tianhui viciously smashed a teacup in his carriage. Duke of Qin. He seemed to suddenly realize something as rage filled his heart. It took him a long time to recover before he spat up a mouthful of blood and fainted. Imperial Physician Gu. Quick, find Imperial Physician Gu. Chu Qingge shouted. But no one found Gu Beiwei, the Imperial Physician. Nobody knew that Gu Beiwei had been the first to leave the palace on the night of the coup. Although Long Tianma had long expected this, he still couldn't help but clench his fists when he heard the news. His expression was gloomy for days. After all, Tianning's central regions only had 3 prefectures, but they were all extremely large and populous. Meanwhile, Tianning's Jiangnan was not only Tianning's most fertile land, but also the richest in all of Cloud Realm continent. It was a land of fish and rice, rich in natural resources. In other words, it had a lot of people and plenty of grain. Father and son had fought each other to the death, but the Duke of Qin had gotten the most out of it without any effort at all. Emperor Tianhui denounced Long Tianma and the Mu family for treason and heresy for usurping the throne. Long Tianma immediately retorted by accusing Emperor Tianhui of listening to slander and failing to distinguish right from wrong by framing and killing loyal subjects. Father and son fought each other to death, but the Duke of Qin didn't say a word. He kept a low profile, but his voice was the loudest and most popular. A month later, Tianning's situation had settled. Emperor Tianhui had taken control of the 10 prefectures in the northwest from Westliang and used the name of Tianning. Long Tianma had taken over the capital and 7 prefectures in the northeast and used the name of Tianhe. Meanwhile, the central and southern regions remained as they were. No one dared to seek refuge with Tianning or Tianan, much less rise up in rebellion. Very soon, rumors began to spread that the Duke of Qin would attack the capital and swallow up the 10 prefectures in the northwest. Both Emperor Tianhui and Long Tianma grew restless, while the armies of Jiangnan and the central regions grew restless. But, in reality, no one knew where His Highness Duke of Qin was. After that night in the capital, His Highness Duke of Qin seemed to have vanished into thin air. He never showed his face in public again. Meanwhile, Han Yunxi was still sitting in her carriage. She knew what was going on as soon as she saw the chaos in the capital. It wasn't because she was smart, but because she'd gotten a good grasp of Long Fei Ye's methods after interacting with him for so long. When she overheard the conversation between Long Fei Yi and Emperor Tianhui in the imperial study, she already knew which move the Long Fei Yi would make. She was about to tell 7th Madam to pack up and leave when the Bailey Army's mermaid soldiers suddenly appeared and took them out of the city via the waterways. After leaving the city, 7th Madam and the rest were arranged to take a different route while she boarded the carriage alone. The mermaid soldiers said that His Highness Duke of Qin wanted to see her. Who knew that they'd end up traveling for an entire month towards the south? It was more like a sightseeing trip, with beautiful scenery along the way. Occasionally, They'd hear news about Emperor Tianhui and Long Tianma, but Han Yunqi wasn't in the mood to pay attention to such details. She was very quiet the entire time. At first, she didn't ask any questions, but allowed the mermaid soldiers to arrange things. All she did was follow them, and when she was bored, she'd hide in the detox system and sleep for an entire afternoon. But gradually, she couldn't take it anymore. Long Feiyi said he wanted to see her, but where was he? Where was he? Where was he? She asked the mermaid soldiers multiple times, but none of them knew. All they said was that His Highness Duke of Qin had ordered them to head towards South Ning Prefecture. Didn't that bastard allow her to go back to the Han estate? Why was he still looking for her? If he wanted to find her, then so be it. Why did he have her head south for so long without showing his face? Just what did he want? Han Yunqi was so angry that she almost poisoned the mermaid soldiers and fled, but she didn't. Instead, she grew even more taciturn and didn't ask any questions. Until one day, the carriage slowly came to a stop in front of an estate. "Esteemed Wang Fei, please get off the carriage," the mermaid soldier reported in a low voice. Han Yunqi had just emerged from the detox system and was still groggy. She got off the carriage as soon as she heard the words "get off," but she froze when she saw the familiar doors. Chapter 503. Aside from the Duke of Qin's estate, this was the place where Han Yunqi had lived the longest. Even the Han estate couldn't compare to this place. Han Yunqi stood at the entrance, staring blankly at the large horizontal board. Here, he had stood behind her and recited the poem Divinator, Praise of the Plum Blossoms. Here, he had asked her what was precious. She had replied, "If one wishes to obtain the heart of one, they will never part even when their hair turns white." Here, she had gotten used to leaning on his shoulder to sleep. He had accompanied her through Tianning's coldest winter. This was the famous Jiangnan Plum Blossom Sea, the most famous of Jiangnan's 3 great gardens. It was named after the plum blossoms that bloomed like a sea every winter and spring. This place was the New Year's gift from Long Feiyi to her. She had kept the command tablet in her medical pouch. Everything from last winter was still vivid in her mind. When she left, she had wondered if she could stay for another season. But, Long Feiyi, summer hasn't even passed yet. How did we become like this? Are you in the estate? Esteemed Wang Fei, please. The mermaid soldier presented the command tablet to the Plum Blossom Gardens, interrupting Han Yunqi's thoughts. Without a doubt, the medical pouch was in his hands. He had taken the command tablet out of it. Han Yunqi was silent for a long time before she finally asked, "Is His Highness inside?" Esteemed Wang Fei, please forgive me. This subordinate isn't clear. This subordinate only received orders to send you here yesterday, the mermaid soldier replied truthfully. Han Yunqi silently took the command tablet and stepped into Jiangnan's Plum Blossom Sea. Once inside, she hurried towards the small hot springs. She didn't know why she was in such a rush, but she was. She had almost rushed to the small hot springs when she came to an abrupt halt at the entrance. Only when she saw the emptiness of the small building did she regain her senses. He wasn't here. She smiled faintly, laughing at her own impatience. What was there to be anxious about? What was the difference between seeing him and not seeing him? He probably didn't want to see her, right? Otherwise, he would have come after promising her for a month, no matter how busy he was. But why did he leave her here in the Plum Blossom Sea? She couldn't even get him. So what was the point of these worldly things? Han Yunqi found a mermaid soldier. Where is the Han family? His Highness has already arranged a residence in the South Ning County. Princess Consort, please be at ease. The mermaid soldier honestly replied, "Prepare the car. I'm going to South Ning," Han Yunqi said calmly. The mermaid soldiers did not receive any orders from His Highness, so they could only listen to their mistress. However, just as the carriage was ready, the sky was suddenly covered with dark clouds. Thunder rumbled, and a torrential downpour was imminent. Han Yunqi could only wait for the rain to stop. She sat on the doorstep and watched the rain get heavier. She unconsciously fell into a daze again. She didn't know that Long Fei had been watching her from a distance. Over the past month, Tianning had been in turmoil, but this ruler of all things had done nothing. He had followed Han Yunqi's carriage from north to south, protecting her in secret and keeping her company in silence. He clearly said that he wanted to see her, and he clearly saw her all the time, but she didn't know. At this moment, she didn't know if he was looking at the rain, at her, or at a daze. His dark eyes were as deep and unfathomable as the sea. His brows were furrowed like swords. He could control the entire world, but not a single woman. Suddenly, a white shadow flew past Han Yunqi's back. Sensing the movement, Han Yunqi immediately turned back. Long Fei wanted to leave, but it was too late. Han Yunqi had caught him red-handed. Lil Thing was panting as it pounced nearby. It had been struggling for a month to lure Mama Yunqi to see Papa Long, but had never found a chance. The rain had finally given it a chance. It only hoped that the next time Papa Long grabbed it by the tail, it wouldn't end up in such a miserable state. Han Yunqi never expected to see Long Fei like this. She gave a start, feeling like she was dreaming. When she turned back, she saw him right behind her. Long Fei glanced in the direction Lil Thing had flown off in before letting Han Yunqi look on without batting an eyelid. Damn it, the two of them were silent as soon as they met. In the end, Long Fei simply turned to leave. You, stop right there, Han Yunqi said coldly. Long Fei really did stop, his back especially silent. What did you find me for? Han Yunqi asked mildly. Long Fei didn't reply. After standing there for a while, he prepared to leave. Han Yunqi watched him leave step by step before chasing after him into the rain. She reached him and threw the Plum Garden command token at him. Give me back my medical pouch. Long Fei didn't catch it, but the ceramic command token shattered into pieces. He looked down at the same time she did the same. Her palms began to ache as she stared at the fragments. Fine, he finally spoke. She looked up at him, only to see him as usual, his face cold and still. Your lordship will go get it. When will you bring it? I want to leave this place, she said cold. He was silent for a while before replying mildly, I don't know. After saying that, he really left, disappearing into the curtain of rain. Han Yunqi stood in the rain in a daze. She felt like the whole world was raining, and it was raining cats and dogs. After the rain, Long Fei disappeared, and Han Yunqi fell seriously ill. She had a severe cold and a high fever. The servant found a physician to take her pulse and prescribe medicine. Unfortunately, when the servant brought the medicine to her mouth, she flung it away and broke 3 big bowls in the morning. In the end, he had appeared. She woke up in a daze and saw him sitting by the bed, looking at her gently. She thought that she was dreaming again and quickly closed her eyes, afraid that she would wake up. Drink the medicine. She woke up the moment he spoke. When she saw his silent face, she knew that this wasn't a dream. He personally fed the medicine to her mouth. She turned her head away, refusing to look at him. He still fed her the medicine, but she angrily picked it up and smashed it on the ground. Long Fei, what do you want? Drink the medicine, he said mildly. Answer my question, she said angrily. After waiting for a month, he didn't say anything when they met and didn't allow her to leave. Was he playing with her? She had a high fever, and when she got angry, her face turned even redder. Just as she finished speaking, she coughed violently, coughing so hard that her heart and lungs hurt. His tone was anxious. Drink the medicine first, then I'll answer you. What if I don't? She challenged him coldly. It wasn't that she was arrogant, but that she was so angry that she didn't feel well. He didn't say anything and suddenly drank a big mouthful of medicine. Then, he grabbed her chin and fiercely sealed her mouth, passing the medicine over. She struggled desperately and hit him, but he didn't let go. After he finished feeding her the medicine in her mouth, he drank another big mouthful and continued. She was so angry that she threw a punch and accidentally hit him in the chest. At that moment, he immediately let go of her and turned his head away, spitting out a mouthful of blood. His internal injury had only recovered by 50%. How could he withstand such a close distance and a punch to the injury? She was instantly stunned. She stared blankly at his face that suddenly turned pale, not knowing what to do. What happened to him? He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and continued to feed her the medicine. Finish it. Long Fei, you're injured? She exclaimed. Although she didn't understand, she guessed that it was an internal injury when she saw that he didn't seem to be hurt. His martial arts were so good. So how could he have an internal injury? Who did it? How much strength could her fist have? Just one punch was enough to make him spit out blood. How serious was his injury? He ignored her question and was as stubborn as a child, refusing to give up. Finish it. What happened to you? What happened? Tell me. What have you been doing for the past month? She anxiously pushed his hand away and wanted to check his chest, but he stubbornly brought the medicine over. Finish it. Long Fei, what happened to you? Tell me. Han Yunshi cried, her tears falling. At this moment, the fear and grievances of the past month all came rushing up. Long Fei, what happened to you? What's wrong? He hastily wiped away her tears, but there was no end to them. I'm fine, he said mildly. Liar. She was so fierce. He clearly spat out blood. So how could he be fine? I'm really fine. Be good and drink the medicine first. He was still worried about the medicine. He couldn't ruin his body after all this time. I won't drink it. He couldn't do anything about her stubbornness, so he could only reply. Kenzo's men hurt me. It's nothing serious. Your master? Han Yunshi was stunned. Duamu Yao couldn't hurt him. Few people in Tianshan Kenzo could either. Why did he leave with Duanmu Yao that day in such a hurry? He didn't even explain himself, and didn't even let her follow him? No, it was martial uncle, Zhang Qiuzi, he said mildly. If it wasn't about master, he would be willing to tell her. As for master, he wouldn't tell her, nor would he let her see him. What happened? Han Yunshi asked seriously. The internal strife between the sects has already been resolved. He was so calm and collected. If he'd fought with Zhang Qiuzi, he wouldn't have been injured so badly. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me anything? She demanded. Things happened so suddenly. So speaking, he offered her the medicine again. I won't drink it. She pushed it aside. I'll take a look at your injuries. Drink the medicine first, he said seriously. She knitted her brows, her eyes red with tears as she didn't move. Helpless, he could only set the medicine down and take off his robes. Even after so long, she could still see the handprint on his chest, a testament to Zhang Qiuzi's ruthlessness. Her heart ached at the sight, but she didn't dare to touch him for fear of hurting him. Just then, I really deserve to die. Drink the medicine first, won't you? He was close to begging her. He'd never begged anyone in his life before. The 3 prefectures of the central region and the 15 cities of Jiangnan were all waiting for his command. But here he was begging a woman to drink medicine. But this woman refused to drink it. You suspect that Gu and I aren't innocent. You're looking down on me. This wasn't a question, but a definite accusation. His hands stiffened. No, he said quickly. But he quickly added, I can't kill you, but I'll kill Gu Qishao. He did mind. I didn't do it on purpose. Back then, she hastily explained the situation to him. For the sake of avoiding that black-robed expert, she and Gu had no choice but to do so. Later on, she dressed Gu's wounds before putting on her clothes properly. That wasn't on purpose at all. Leaving aside the fact that it was her savior who'd been hurt, even if it wasn't, she couldn't care less in such an urgent situation. Gu's injuries were too severe, so saving him was a race against time. Despite her explanations, his face was still gloomy. I'll never forgive you. Drink the medicine. Chapter 504. I'll never forgive you. With a single sentence, he pronounced Han Yunshi's death sentence. Her eyes were red from crying as she stared at him innocently, as if she didn't understand the meaning of his words. Drink the medicine, he urged again. Whether Tianing was in chaos or Cloud Realm continent, the most important thing in the world was the bowl of medicine in his hands. Han Yunshi stared at him for a long time, her lips pursed tightly. She didn't speak or drink. Long Fei was probably the most patient person in his life. Be good, don't make a fuss. The edge of the bowl was already pressed against Han Yunqi's lips, but she still didn't move. Drink it. He lowered his eyes, his temper so good that it seemed like he would never lose his temper. Only then did she speak. I really didn't do it on purpose. He avoided the topic. Drink the medicine. Will you forgive me? She asked seriously. There was no room for discussion, so he shook his head. She suddenly took the medicine and drank it all in one gulp. I finished drinking it. This, Long Fei was surprised and startled. He should have sighed in relief when she finished the medicine, but now his heart felt even more stifled. I finished it all, Han Yunqi said again. Long Fei replied mildly. Unexpectedly, Han Yunqi said, You can leave now? Just who was sentencing who to death? Long Fei stood rooted to the ground. Han Yunqi ignored him and lay down, covering herself with the covers and closing her eyes to sleep. The already quiet room grew even quieter, like a silent time. After a long, long time, Long Fei finally got up. Was he really leaving? Yes, he was really leaving. He turned to leave, step by step, away from the bed. Han Yunqi stole a glance and was about to get up when Long Fei suddenly stopped. She hastily shut her eyes. Long Fei stood at the same spot for a while before returning to sit by the bed. However, he did not speak and only looked at her. Not long after, Han Yunqi opened her eyes. Just as she was about to speak, he said, I'll leave after you recover. Under the silk quilt, her hands were clenched tightly, but she replied nonchalantly, Sure. He stayed just like that. This was like an unspoken agreement. He didn't mention anything about Gu, and she didn't chase after him to ask if he forgave her. He stayed by her bedside the entire day. Not only did he personally feed her medicine, he even fed her 3 meals. Every hour, he would touch her forehead to check if her fever had subsided. She was lying down, and he was sitting. The two of them did not speak for the entire day, but it was not awkward at all. At night, her fever had not completely subsided. He gently touched her forehead, as if he could not feel it. He leaned close to her and gently lifted her bangs. He pressed his face against her forehead to feel her temperature, and casually said, It seems to be quite hot. His smooth chin was right above the tip of her nose. At such a close distance, she could smell the most familiar scent. She said, It should have subsided. I'll be fine tomorrow after a good night's sleep. Don't worry. He retreated, not forgetting to tidy up her bangs. His slender and good-looking fingers gently played with her hair. It was so gentle that it did not seem like him, Long Fei. It was clearly just a small amount of bangs, but he fiddled with them for a long time. She did not move or make a sound, allowing him to do as he pleased. In the end, he still had to stop. Once he let go, her heart felt empty. Let me see the wound on your shoulder. He actually remembered it all along. It's healed. There's only a little scar left. It had been a month, and the white-clothed gentleman's medicine was very effective. Let this prince take a look. He insisted. She could only take off her clothes and reveal her shoulder. As she said, the wound had completely healed, leaving only a shallow scar. He gently caressed it. She turned her head away, afraid that she would succumb to the gentleness in his hands. I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose, he said mildly. After a while, she said, It's okay. I forgive you. His hand froze on her shoulder. She pushed it away without a trace, put on her clothes, and lazily snuggled into the blankets. Aren't you going to treat your wound? She asked. Wait until you're asleep, he said. Thus, she immediately turned her back to him to sleep. He sat cross-legged on a short couch and treated his wound for an entire night. She kept her eyes open until dawn with her back facing him. They had agreed that they would leave once they were well. No matter how severe the typhoid or cold was, it would always get better, right? She turned over and saw him looking at her. Just like last night, he leaned over and pressed his cold cheek against her forehead. It subsided. He was very sure. She coughed a few times. She was very clear that as long as she took her medicine on time, She would be fine in at most 3 days. Let the doctor take a look again, he said again. She answered mildly. When the doctor came, he actually said that her body was in good condition. He said that she would be fine after taking her medicine for another day. Her originally weak body had long been nourished by him using old hens and lobsters. Moreover, the medicine that the doctor prescribed for her were all treasures that took effect quickly. It was really impossible for her to stay sick forever. She was originally not someone who could lie down. She could clearly get out of bed, but she lay down for another day. On this day, he even personally attended to her. Not a single servant girl was allowed to enter. After feeding her medicine, he sat at the side and treated her wound. She quietly looked at him. Suddenly, she had an illusion that they were back in the cold winter of last year. 100 steps. Compared to this time, which was closer and which was further, the next morning, Han Yunxi fully recovered. She decisively got out of bed and said straightforwardly, "Long Fei Yi, I'm fine." "Oh." Long Fei Yi nodded. After a moment, he took out a command token. It was none other than the Plum C command token that had been smashed into pieces. He had actually fixed it back together. Although it was full of cracks, it was still intact. He said, "If you don't want to return to the Duke of Qin's residence, how about returning to Jiangnan's Plum Sea?" Han Yunqi's heart clenched slightly. Looking at Long Fei Ye's face, which had been silent for 2 days, she felt her heart ache for no reason. Jiangnan's Plum Sea already belonged to her, but it was still given to her by him. Was it any different from returning to the Duke of Qin's residence? Okay. She agreed just like that and took back the command token. He lowered his head and turned to leave. He left? He left just like that. Bastard. You really left when I told you to. Han Yunqi's heart fiercely skipped a beat. Without thinking, she chased after Long Fei Yi from behind and hugged him tightly around his waist. "If you'll never forgive me, can you pretend to forgive me for a while?" He pulled her hand as if to pull it away. She hugged him even tighter in fright. "Can I?" Long Fei Yi still pulled her away and turned around to look at her with furrowed brows. Han Yunxi was flustered. Her heart felt stifled, and even breathing became difficult. He actually looked helpless as he said mildly, "This prince only wants to get the medical kit. Don't be anxious." Han Yunxi was stunned on the spot. She suddenly didn't know what to say. Long Fei Yi couldn't help but stroke her bangs when he saw her dazed expression. "Since you want to pretend, then pretend for the rest of your life." Han Yunxi almost cried. He shouldn't bully her like this. She was really frightened. "Long Fei Yi, how can you be so bad?" She was about to cry, but he still asked her seriously, "What do you think? Is this okay?" She didn't say anything and just looked at him. She was clearly about to cry, but she smiled. He still held her hand like before, their fingers intertwined as they strolled through the plum blossom forest. She was still panicking as she sorted out her messy thoughts. She thought that she really liked this man. Otherwise, why didn't she just walk away? Why would she be bullied to this extent? She looked up and saw his naturally cold side profile. At this moment, what was he thinking? "Long Fei Yi," she spoke softly. Many years later, she would forget that it was from this moment onwards that she no longer called this man Your Highness, but directly called him by his name. He looked over. "What are you thinking about?" After the quarrel, she was less cautious than before. "I'm thinking about the antidote for broomcorn millet poison. Do you believe me?" Long Fei Yi said mildly. Han Yunxi only remembered this matter now. Gu's words were still ringing in her ears, and Long Fei Ye's attitude was like this. Who should she believe? Long Fei Yi stopped and asked forcefully, "Do you believe me?" "Believe what?" Suddenly, a familiar voice sounded. Han Yunxi looked back and saw the Tang clan's young head, Tang Li, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. This fellow was still dressed in white and had an immortal-like temperament, but he still ruined his good temperament with a single word. "Han Yunxi, you're finally not throwing a tantrum anymore?" Tang Li asked with a smile. Han Yunxi not only pretended not to hear, but also not to see him. She turned her head away and ignored him. "Han Yunxi, Aunt Ru was right to scold you. You're a femme fatale. Do you know how many people in Jiangnan and the central regions are waiting for my brother to declare himself an emperor and establish a country? Tang Li was about to continue when Long Fei Ye's cold gaze silenced him. Han Yunshi said coldly, "Your brother won't declare himself an emperor, much less establish a country. You're thinking too much." A trifling 3 prefectures in the central regions and 15 cities in Jiangnan were nothing in Long Fei Ye's eyes. If he wanted to declare himself an emperor and establish a country, he'd have to conquer all of Cloud Realm continent. Long Fei Ye looked at Han Yunshi with interest. "How did you know? Your Highness, the 3 prefectures in the central regions and the 15 cities in Jiangnan have long been under your control. What difference does it make whether you make a move or not? If you don't declare yourself an emperor and establish a country, you'll be able to give Long Tianma and Tianhui some thought. Who wouldn't covet the people in the central regions and Jiangnan's granary?" Han Yunshi smiled as she spoke. "Anyone who covets the things in someone else's hands will be used by that person." Long Fei Yi applauded Han Yunshi 3 times. Although he didn't say anything, he'd already made his stance clear. Besides this woman, there was probably no one else who could read his thoughts so thoroughly. He could have used Long Tianma and the Mu family to take over all of Tianning, but he wasn't in a rush. Without Emperor Tianhui and Long Tianma, who would help him deal with Western Zhou and Northern Li, Tang Li didn't have such a good head for politics, but he understood after listening to Han Yunshi's analysis. He sighed with emotion. "Han Yunshi, you really aren't stupid except when you're jealous. If you get jealous so easily, you might turn into an idiot." Han Yunshi grew angry. "Oh, that's right. You turn into an idiot too when you're bewitched by a man's charms." Tang Li couldn't seem to stop teasing her. "Try spouting more nonsense." Han Yunshi narrowed her eyes dangerously. "How am I spouting nonsense? Just then, you were talking about goo, weren't you? You're so smart, but you still can't figure it out." Gu Qixiao had purposely mixed in the powder that would turn the bottle black. "You're saying he just wants to keep the antidote for himself? He's clearly plotting to drive a wedge between the two of you." Tang Li said seriously, "You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."